Skyrim is a massive world, but not all of it feels connected. Some places sit far outside everything else, cut off by distance, terrain, or just the feeling that no one is meant to be there. You don't stumble into them by accident. You have to go out of your way to find them. And when you do, the difference is immediate. The noise disappears, the movement fades, even the world itself starts to feel quieter, like it's pulled back just enough to leave you alone with wherever you've ended up. These aren't just remote locations, they're the places that feel completely separated from everything else. And the longer you stay in them, the more that isolation starts to sink in. In the rugged north of Skyrim, between the snowy trails that connect Winterhold and Windhelm, there lies a place so unremarkable that many players walk past it without even realizing it exists. A wooden sign, a small shack, and a hollow cave mouth mark its entrance. Inside you'll not find bustling workers, veins of precious ore, or the lively atmosphere of Skyrim's many other mines. Instead you find nothing, dust, empty tunnels, and a group of miners stubbornly refusing to abandon hope. This is a location that feels like a joke at the player's expense. Skyrim is a game filled with purpose. Every dungeon, every cave, every town usually serves a narrative or mechanical function. Yet this mine appears to break that rule. It is, for what it's worth, the only mine in Skyrim that exists for no reason at all. But that emptiness is exactly what makes this mine so fascinating. Why did Bethesda include this strange, barren location? And what does it say about Skyrim's world building that such a purposeless place exists at all? When the Dragonborn stumbles upon Whistling Mine, expectations run high. The name itself conjures mystery. Perhaps a mine haunted by a mysterious whistling sound, or maybe a productive site rich with valuable ore. Skyrim's other mines reward exploration with iron, silver, gold, or even unique quest lines. Surely Whistling Mine should be no different. Instead, the player discovers disappointment. The mine is completely devoid of resources. There are barely any ore veins to mine, no treasures to uncover, and no enemies to fight. Inside are only a handful of NPCs, miners who, despite their presence, seem to have no purpose. They wander the mine, complain about its barrenness, and go about their day as if something important is going to happen. But the player quickly realizes nothing important is actually ever going to happen in this mine. Unlike Kolsega Mine, with its lucrative veins of gold, or the Sidna Mine, tied directly to Markarth's prison system and the Forsworn, Whistling Mine feels hollow. It is a location that offers neither narrative nor mechanical reward. Though the mine itself offers little, the NPCs inside provide a strange glimpse into Skyrim's quieter storytelling. Here you can meet a small cast of miners, led by Thorgar, the Overseer, a man who seems determined to keep the operation alive despite the obvious futility. Alongside him are other workers whose dialogue makes it clear they are scraping by, frustrated by the mine's lack of resources, but still holding out hope that they will strike big. Unlike other Skyrim NPCs, they don't point you to a quest, treasure, or larger storylines. Instead, they exist simply to complain. Their lives are stagnant, their work meaningless, and their mine utterly barren. This makes Whistling Mine more unsettling than it first appears. In a world filled with heroes, dragons, and legends, here are ordinary people trapped in futility. They dig in a mine that has nothing, clinging to the illusion of productivity. In many ways, it feels like a cruel social commentary. Not everyone in Skyrim is destined for greatness. Some are doomed to toil in places that will never reward their labour. The defining feature of Whistling Mine is its complete lack of ore. This sets it apart from every other mine in Skyrim. Ironbreaker Mine in Dawnstar provides a steady supply of iron. Quicksilver Mine, also in Dawnstar, gives players access to quicksilver veins. Kolsega Mine is rich in gold and a jackpot for any adventurer. Gloombound Mine is one of the largest sources of ebony in the province. But Whistling Mine? Well, it has nothing. Players expecting even a few iron veins are greeted with empty tunnels. This lack of reward creates a kind of narrative void. Why would the miners even stay? And why does the mine exist at all? Skyrim typically rewards exploration, but here the reward is just absence, and that absence makes the player pause. The emptiness itself then becomes the story. The question then becomes, why did Bethesda put Whistling Mine in the game? Was it an oversight, a cut piece of content, or an intentional design choice? Several theories could give us the clue. Cut content theory. Many believe Whistling Mine was originally supposed to feature ore veins or a quest, but these were removed during development. The NPCs, dialogues, and mine structures suggest something more was planned, but abandoned. World building. Not every mine in Skyrim should be a gold mine, literally. Whistling Mine reflects the reality of failure, a reminder that not every business or settlement thrives. Its very emptiness grounds Skyrim in realism. Dark humor theory. Skyrim often hides jokes within its world, and Whistling Mine may be one of them. The name suggests promise, but the reality is disappointment, a wary commentary on a wasted effort, both for the miners and the player. But whatever the truth, the result is the same. Whistling Mine stands out precisely because it does nothing at all. Skyrim is filled with locations that seem small or insignificant. There are unmarked ruins, shacks with minor backstories, or caves with only a handful of enemies. But even these usually offer something: loot, lore, or at least combat. Whistling Mine lacks all of that. It is perhaps the only location in the game where the player gains absolutely nothing from it. Compare it to Miko's Shack, which though small introduces the loyal dog companion Miko. Dead Lover's Camp, a tiny unmarked location, yet it's deeply emotional in its tragedy. Refugees Rest, a ruined watchtower filled with skeletons, quietly hinting at the horrors of war. Each of these minor places adds texture to Skyrim's world, but Whistling Mine, by contrast, removes that texture. Its purpose is in its purposelessness. Perhaps the deeper meaning of Whistling Mine lies in its commentary on labour. Skyrim often highlights the tensions between power and poverty. Jarls, guilds, and wealthy merchants thrive, while farmers, miners, and beggars struggle in obscurity. The miners of Whistling Mine are emblematic of this imbalance. They labour endlessly, but their labour yields nothing. Their overseer clings to hope, but his hope is delusion. Their existence is a tragedy, not of violence, but of stagnation. In a province where great battles rage and heroes rise, Whistling Mine is a quiet reminder of futility. Not all stories are heroic, some are just empty. One of the most striking things about Whistling Mine is that the Dragonborn cannot fix it. In Skyrim, the player often has the power to transform lives. You can liberate towns, rescue hostages, overthrow Jarls, rebuild the Thieves Guild, and restore the Dark Brotherhood. Mines too can be cleared of bandits or forsworn, reopening them for the workers. But Whistling Mine, it remains barren no matter what you do. You cannot uncover hidden ore veins, rally the miners, or change their fate. This makes this mine feel especially bleak. It is not simply forgotten, it is just unchangeable. Even the Dragonborn's legendary power cannot bring purpose to this hollow place. And what of the name Whistling Mine? Surely it implies something unusual, perhaps supernatural. Players might expect eerie ambient sounds, a ghostly whistle carried by the wind, or a legend hidden beneath the tunnels. But the name, like the mine, delivers nothing. There is no whistle, no mystery, no revelation, just silence. This, more than anything, cements the mine's identity as the most purposeless location in Skyrim. Its very name is a false promise, a tease that never pays off. Whistling Mine stands as one of Skyrim's strangest curiosities. A mine without ore, NPCs without quests, a name without meaning. Yet in its emptiness, it captures something haunting about the world Bethesda created. For every Jarl, hero, or Dragonborn, there are countless others living in loneliness, working without reward, existing without purpose. Whistling Mine is not a place of riches or glory. It is a place of silence, futility, and forgotten lives. It is, without a question, the only mine in Skyrim that exists for no reason. Skyrim is full of characters who demand your attention. Ulfric shouts his rebellion from Windhelm's throne. Maven Blackbriar casts her shadow across Riften. Even the smallest villagers, farmers, miners, hunters, usually serve some identifiable purpose in the vast clockwork of the game. And then there's Narfi, a beggar who lives on the edge of Ivarstead, in the ruins of his family's house, scraping by in dirt and despair. You don't find him unless you're looking, and if you do, the game itself seems unsure what to do with him. He is lonely, broken, and largely ignored, both by the town he lives near and by the narrative of Skyrim itself. Narfi is not just a side character, he's a wound in the world building, an NPC so isolated, so forgotten, that his very presence feels like a mistake. And yet he lingers. His life reduced to ashes. But why? Ivarstead is already a strange town, a waypoint between Whiterun and Riften. It is best known as the final stop before the 7,000 steps up to High Hrothgar. For most players, it's a pass-through, a place to grab supplies, listen to rumours, and then begin the climb to meet the Greybeards. But if you walk just outside of the town, across the bridge, and towards the riverbank, you'll notice something peculiar. A burnt down house, collapsed, abandoned. Inside the ruins, you'll hear muttering, and then you'll see him, Narfi the beggar. He doesn't greet you like other NPCs, he doesn't stand tall, he doesn't have a job, doesn't contribute. Instead, he shuffles, mumbles, and begs. He's a man who has been hollowed out. He is in many ways the physical embodiment of absence. Narfi is not homeless by choice. His family's house burned down, leaving him destitute. His sister, Rhaeda, went missing and never returned, leaving him both orphaned and alone. The trauma shattered him, and when you meet him in the game, he is already too far gone. The villagers of Ivarstead know him, they pity him, in the way one might pity a stray dog, but no one truly ever helps him. He is tolerated but not embraced. The innkeepers will sometimes mention his state. The townsfolk shake their head, but no one offers him food or shelter or companionship. Skyrim is a land filled with tragedy, but Narfi is unique because his tragedy is not tied to prophecy, war, or gods. It is simple, domestic, and all too human. The story of a man who lost everything and in turn was left behind. If you talk to Narfi, he will mumble about his missing sister, Rhaeda. This triggers a small miscellaneous quest, the straw that broke. You're asked to search for Rhaeda. Her fate is bleak. You find a necklace by the river suggesting that she drowned. You return to Narfi with the news and he thanks you in his sort of broken way. That's it. That's the quest. No reward, no consequence, no major branching path. Just the quiet resolution of a man whose world is already over. Compared to the sprawling quest lines of Skyrim, the Civil War, the Dark Brotherhood, the College of Winterhold, Narfi's quest feels almost like a whisper, but perhaps that's the point. It is not about changing the world, it is about changing one's understanding of his loss. Still, the question lingers, why does Skyrim include this NPC at all? Most characters in Skyrim have a gameplay function. Shopkeepers sell goods, followers fight by your side, trainers teach skills. Even background NPCs serve to populate towns, flesh out culture, or connect to Radiant quests. But Narfi, he offers nothing. He cannot be married, recruited, or trained. His quest yields no material benefit. He doesn't even move from the ruins of his house. He is frozen in place, a relic of sorrow, existing only to remind players of what cannot be fixed. In this sense, he feels purposeless, and that purposelessness is precisely what makes him so disturbing. He's not just an NPC, he is a monument to futility. If you've joined the Dark Brotherhood, you encounter Narfi again, this time as a target. Astrid assigns you to kill Narfi. No justification, no backstory, no explanation. He is simply just marked for death. This transforms Narfi from a forgotten beggar into one of Skyrim's most unsettling moral dilemmas. Do you kill a broken man already destroyed by life simply because you were told to? When you approach him, he doesn't resist. He doesn't even seem to understand. He just wanders, starts running, muttering obliviously. Striking him down feels crueler than killing any bandit or soldier. But the game doesn't care. The Dark Brotherhood rewards you all the same. His death changes nothing. His absence barely even registers. It is as if the world of Skyrim, like the people of Ivarstead, have already forgotten him. Nafi's existence raises fascinating questions about Skyrim's design. Why include such a character? Why give him no real role, no meaningful quest, or no redemption? The answer may lie in contrast. Skyrim is full of chosen ones, heroes, villains, and gods. By comparison, Nafi is a reminder of the people who slip through the cracks. He embodies the theme of isolation, showing what happens to those who are too small, too powerless to be swept up in prophecy. His placement in Ivarstead is deliberate. Travellers pass through here on their way to High Hrothgar to seek enlightenment, to hear destiny call. Nafi sits just outside of that, close enough to be seen but far enough to be ignored. In a game about fate, Nafi has none. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of Nafi is not his backstory or his role in quests, but simply how alone he feels. When you speak to him, there are no background voices cheering, no bustling market sounds, no friends approaching, just the wind, the ruin of his house, and his muttering. The silence is louder than any dragon's roar. It communicates despair in a way combat never could. Players who stumble upon Nafi often leave unsettled. They remember him not because he was important, but because he was forgotten. Skyrim has its share of outcasts and broken souls. Not Beard in Kyne's Grove, the Madman in the Reach, even Cicero the Fool. But all of them have connections, to quests, to factions, to larger themes. Nafi has none. He's not a mad jester tied to prophecy. He's not a bandit hiding from the law. He is not a mage who dabbled too far. He is simply a man destroyed by grief. And in this way, he is more realistic than most NPCs. His suffering isn't epic, it's personal, which is exactly why it hits harder. If Skyrim is about choices, then Nafi represents the illusion of choice. You can help him find closure about his sister. You can kill him for the Brotherhood, or you can ignore him entirely. No matter what you do, the outcome feels empty. There's no celebration, no recognition, no reward. His life begins and ends in quiet misery. And maybe that's the message. Not every story in Skyrim is one of glory. Some are about loss, some are about despair, and some are about lives so small they slip through the cracks. Nafi represents the forgotten people of Tamriel, the ones who don't matter to history, but still exist in the margins. What lingers most about Nafi is not his dialogue or his quest, but the guilt he plants in other players. Do you kill him and feel like a monster? Do you leave him alive knowing he'll continue to suffer alone? Do you ignore him and pretend you never saw him? None of these options feel good, and maybe that's the genius of his design. Nafi is not there to serve you, he's there to remind you that some wounds never heal. Nafi is, without question, the most isolated NPC in Skyrim. He has no allies, no purpose, no impact on the world. His only legacy is the uncomfortable silence he leaves behind. In a game filled with heroes, villains, dragons, and gods, this beggar is the reminder of what lies outside the spotlight. He is the human cost of a harsh world. He is what happens when no one cares, and that perhaps is why players remember him. Not because he mattered, but because he didn't. When people think of Skyrim's Rift, their minds immediately go to Riften, the bustling city of thieves and corruption that dominates the region's identity. Or perhaps they think of Ivarstead, the humble village at the foot of the throat of the world, forever tied to the pilgrimage of the Greybeards, and even smaller places like Darkwater Crossing seem to have a similar presence. Their stories woven into the fabric of Skyrim's world, even though small. But there is one settlement in the Rift that sits far from those well-known paths. A mining village clinging to survival on the northern edge of the Rift. This place is the kind of place most players never truly notice. It exists in a liminal space, not large enough to be a proper town, not small enough to vanish entirely into obscurity. It lingers in the background, defined not by grandeur or tragedy, but by its sheer isolation. and it may very well be the most isolated town in all of Skyrim. Shaw's Stone sits in a lonely corner of the Rift, tucked away to the north, separated from Riften by hills and winding paths. It isn't located on any major road, nor is it a stop on the way to a grand quest. This geography matters. Skyrim is a game where roads often dictate narrative significance. Riverwood thrives because it sits directly on the road between Helgen and Whiterun. Ivarstead draws pilgrims because of its position on the 7,000 steps. Dawnstar rests on a major coastal route. Shaw's Stone, however, is not on the way to anywhere. It is an endpoint, a detour, a settlement hidden in the folds of the Rift's rugged terrain. This placement ensures its isolation, both physically in the world and psychologically in the minds of players. Even when you do arrive, it feels like you've stumbled upon something you weren't meant to find. A small collection of houses, a mine, a smelter, and a few wary faces, hardly enough to justify its place on the map. The very name Shaw's Stone speaks volumes about the village's identity. Shaw, the Nordic god of afterlife and warrior spirit, is revered as a central figure in Nord belief. To name a place after Shaw's Stone suggests deep relevance, as though this little town is tied to something holy or ancestral, and yet there is no shrine, no temple, no marker to explain this name. Unlike Kyne's Grove, where the name ties directly to Nordic myth, Shaw's Stone carries a title that feels weighty but ultimately hollow. This disconnect adds to the town's sense of isolation. It wears a name of grandeur, but in practice it's just another mining village. It feels as though it should mean more, but it really just doesn't. The beating heart of Shaw's Stone is Red Belly Mine, and here lies one of the strangest details about the town. The mine, which provides iron ore for the settlement, is also infested with frostbite spiders. When the Dragonborn arrives, this infestation looms as the central problem. The villagers, hardy Nords who should be able to handle such threats, are powerless, reduced to begging for help. For a player used to grand quests involving Daedric princes or dragons, the task of clearing spiders from a mine might feel trivial, but it is exactly this smallness that makes Shaw's Stone stand out. Its great crisis is not war, nor banditry, nor political intrigue. It is survival against pests that have overtaken their own source of livelihood. Once cleared, the mine returns to its monotonous cycle. Workers return, ore is smelted, and life continues. The Dragonborn leaves, and Shaw's Stone remains unchanged, its isolation still unbroken. Shaw's Stone is home to only a handful of NPCs, including the mine's overseer, Filjar, and his wife Oddfell, and a few other workers who just mumble during the day. These characters are not woven into Skyrim's grander narratives. They do not lead quests of consequence, nor do they tie into faction politics. They exist simply as miners. Their dialogue reflects this as well, revolving almost entirely around the mine, its dangers, and their humble work. They are not dreamers, adventurers, or schemers. They are static figures locked into lives defined by labour. This lack of depth makes them easy to overlook, but in their simplicity, they embody the forgotten working class of Skyrim. While the Jarls wage wars and the Dragonborn slays dragons, these miners toil in obscurity, unnoticed and unremarked upon. It is their isolation, not just geographically, but narratively as well, that makes them some of the loneliest characters in the game. Though Shaw's Stone appears disconnected from Skyrim's greater conflicts, it does brush up against the edges of the Civil War, like some of the other mining communities. The mine supplies ore to the surrounding region, which in turn fuels the production of weapons. Its allegiance, like many settlements, falls under the Rift, and thus the rule of Jarl Layla Lawgiver in Riften. But in the day-to-day lives of the Shaw's Stone miners, the war hardly registers. This absence is telling. Other towns are defined by their relationship to the war. Dawnstar is torn between Stormcloak and Imperial sympathies, while Falkreath sits as a prize to be contested. Shaw's Stone, however, is too small to matter. The great tides of history flow around it, leaving the villagers to their own isolated struggles. It is a settlement so far removed from the political storm that it feels almost timeless. As I have said previously, Skyrim contains several mining villages, but few are as lonely as Shaw's Stone. Markarth, Whiterun and the Reach is a hotbed of conflict between the Silverbloods and the independent miners, with quests and tensions. Darkwater Crossing is small, but it is tied to the tragedy of Helgen, giving its miners a history and some sort of narrative weight. Stone Hills is bleak and empty, but at least it touches the Civil War with its imperial connections. Shaw's Stone, by comparison, has none of this. Its mine is not valuable enough to fight over, its villages are not remarkable enough to drive quests, and its location is not central enough to matter. It is the purest form of a forgotten town, existing for itself and for no one else. Part of what makes this place so isolated is its position within the Rift. The Rift is one of Skyrim's most distinctive holds, defined by golden forests, craggy cliffs, and the looming presence of Riften's corruption. But while most of the Rift feels alive with travellers, patrols, and danger, Shaw's Stone sits apart. Its northern edge is quieter, the roads less travelled. This creates a paradox. The Rift is one of the most vibrant holds, but within it lies one of the most lifeless settlements. The contrast only emphasises Shaw's Stone's isolation, as though it exists in a pocket of silence carved out from the Riften's noisy landscape. When the Dragonborn first steps into Shaw's Stone, there is often a sense of surprise. Many players arrive not because they sought it out, but because they stumbled upon it by chance. The reaction is usually the same: oh, there's a town here. And after clearing the mine or speaking to the villagers, the player quickly moves on. Few have reasons to return, and the town has no equipment, no major quests, and no narrative hooks. It becomes a place remembered vaguely, if at all, a dot on the map that is rarely visited. For the player, Shaw's Stone becomes a symbol of Skyrim's forgotten corners, places that exist not to dazzle but to remind us that the world is bigger than the Dragonborn story. Perhaps the saddest part of this little mining village is that its grand name suggests a legacy it cannot live up to. To invoke Shaw is to invoke the heart of Nord culture, their god of warriors and the honoured dead. And yet here, this place is no more than a forgotten hamlet. Its stone, whatever it once meant, is buried beneath the banality of mining and survival. It feels as though the town is a shadow of something greater, a place that once may have held significance, but has now slipped into irrelevance. And in that way, its name becomes almost tragic. Unlike some settlements that rise and fall with quests, Shaw's Stone never changes. The mine may be cleared, but life continues as before. The villagers remain, endlessly repeating their routines. Nothing shifts, nothing grows, nothing collapses. This permanence creates a peculiar kind of loneliness. Other towns feel alive because they change. Riften can lose its Jarl. Falkreath can be fought over. Whiterun can be besieged. Shaw's Stone, however, exists outside of time. It is frozen in its isolation, forever the same small town and forever unnoticed. Shaw's Stone may not be haunted like Old Roldan, tragic like Darkwater Crossing, or corrupt like Riften. It may not hold ancient secrets or lost treasures, but in its simplicity, it becomes one of the most haunting places in Skyrim. It is a town that exists without a purpose, a mine that barely matters, a name that promises more than it delivers. It is the kind of place most players forget, and that is precisely what makes it the most isolated town in Skyrim. For in a world filled with dragons, Daedra, and heroes, perhaps the greatest loneliness of all is simply to be ignored. Markarth is a city of contradictions. Built into the crumbling ruins of the Dwemer, its golden towers rise proudly above, while its underbelly festers with poverty, corruption, and shadows. And hidden deeper still, below even the reach of the Silverblood family's power or the Jarl's decrees, lurks something more sinister, a secret faction most players might never stumble upon. It's not a guild you can join through banners or oaths. It's not an organisation shaping the Civil War or Skyrim's future. Instead, it's a gathering of outcasts, bound by a hunger that is a bit more taboo than necromancy or Daedric worship itself. Cannibalism. This is the Coven of Namira, a faction so isolated, so detached from Skyrim's world, that it almost feels like a secret meant to remain undiscovered. To understand her coven, one must first know Namira, the Daedric prince they serve. Namira is called the Lady of Decay. She is the mistress of repulsion, darkness, vermin, and filth. Unlike princes who tempt mortals with power or beauty, Namira offers only revulsion. Her followers embrace the aspect of life that most reject: rot, death, and ugliness. Cannibalism in her eyes is a form of worship. To consume the flesh of the dead is to embrace decay, to revel in what others fear. Her faithful are often described as repulsive, not just in habit, but in appearance. It is fitting that her Skyrim cult hides in the shadows of Markarth, one of the bleakest cities in the province. You never hear about Namira's coven openly. No citizen of Markarth will whisper about it. No guard will mention it. Instead, you stumble upon it almost by accident. It begins at the Hall of the Dead in Markarth, where you overhear a priest, the priest of Arche, complaining about bodies being desecrated. If you press him, he confesses something horrifying: corpses in the catacombs are being eaten. This is your first hint that something unnatural stirs in Markarth's foundations. If you investigate, you'll meet Eola, a mysterious woman who openly admits to her cannibalistic practices and invites you to a banquet. And just like that, without fanfare or build-up, you're suddenly standing on the threshold of Skyrim's strangest, most isolated faction. The questline tied to Namira's coven is chillingly direct. Eola asks you to lure the priest, the innocent priest of Arche, to a feast. Once there, the coven reveals itself, a circle of cannibals gathered around a long stone table waiting for flesh. The player is forced into a choice. Do you participate or do you resist? If you indulge, you carve into the priest's body and eat with the coven, solidifying your place among them. For your loyalty, you're given Namira's ring, an artifact that increases health from feeding on corpses. It's one of the darkest quests in Skyrim, not because of blood or gore, but because of its moral implications. You are asked to betray trust, commit sacrilege, and engage in something profoundly taboo. And when it's over, the faction fades back into silence. The coven is made up of scattered, lonely individuals drawn together by their shared hunger. Each one feels out of place in Skyrim society, their true selves hidden until the feast. Eola, the recruiter, is perhaps the most vocal, cold, calculating, and strangely charismatic. She serves as the coven's mouthpiece. The priest, though not a member, becomes the symbol of their betrayal. His innocence highlights the depravity of what follows. Around the table you'll find other citizens who, outside this quest, blend seamlessly back into Skyrim's world. They aren't enemies, they aren't villains, they're people you might pass in a marketplace without knowing the darkness within them. This blending of the ordinary with the monstrous makes the coven unsettling. They don't live in caves or shrines, they literally walk among us. Unlike the Thieves' Guild in Riften or the Dark Brotherhood in Falkreath, Namira's coven really has no headquarters beyond a hidden chamber. They don't wield power in politics or war, they don't offer jobs, progression, or a hierarchy to climb. Their entire presence is tied to a single quest line, and once it ends, they disperse back into obscurity. This is why the coven feels so isolated. They exist entirely on the fringes of Skyrim's world, untouched by the grander conflicts. You can complete the quest, acquire the ring, and never hear from them again. No guard will mention the murders, no bard will sing of the feast. It's almost as though Bethesda wanted them forgotten. What makes Namira's cult feel even lonelier than the others is the nature of their worship. In Skyrim, Daedric worship is not uncommon. You'll find shrines to Azura and cults of Mehrunes Dagon. These princes are dangerous, but their followers often hold real influence. Namira, however, represents something so viral that even other Daedric cultists would recoil. Cannibalism is not a power fantasy, it's degradation. The rewards are meager, the Ring of Namira pales in comparison to artifacts like Azura's Star or Dawnbreaker. In gameplay terms, the faction is optional. Its rewards are underwhelming, its presence fleeting, its narrative terms, it is feared, hidden, and despised. Thus, Namira's coven is undoubtedly isolated, shunned by society and ignored by players. One of the strangest details about this faction is how little the world reacts. If you kill the priest, no one in Markarth mourns him. No new dialogue acknowledges his absence. The city carries on as if nothing happened, as if the priest disappearing is just an ordinary affair. Similarly, if you spare him and refuse to join, the coven simply retreats back into the shadows, their hunger unquenched but unpunished. Again, the city never speaks of it. This silence contributes to the sense that Namira's coven exists in a vacuum. Their feast is a dark secret buried beneath the stone city, unseen, unremarked, and unresolved. Contrast Namira's coven with the Dark Brotherhood, who also practice murder in secret. The Brotherhood has a sanctuary, a hierarchy, and a lengthy quest line. They leave marks on Skyrim's political landscape. The Coven, by comparison, feels skeletal. One quest, one banquet, and nothing more. No further involvement and no future. It's even less developed than the Bard's College, often mocked for being underwhelming, but at least the Bards have a hall, multiple NPCs who speak more than just a few words, and a small sequence of quests. Namira's faithful barely qualify as a faction at all. This raises the question, why even include them? The tragedy of Namira's coven is their isolation. Unlike warriors or thieves who find family in their guilds, Namira's followers have no friends beyond the feast. They don't live together, they don't build a community, they came together only to eat and then they scatter. Their faction is less of an organisation and more of a temporary congregation of lonely outcasts. This loneliness reflects Namira herself. She is a prince of decay, of isolation, of filth. To follow her is to be cast out, to walk among others while hiding your true self. For players, this makes the faction memorable in concept, but hollow in execution. You are left with unease and not belonging. So why does the Coven of Namira exist in Skyrim at all? It doesn't shape the main story, it doesn't expand into a faction questline, it doesn't leave lasting consequences. But perhaps that's the point. Namira's followers aren't supposed to feel powerful or relevant. They're supposed to feel repulsive, forgotten, hidden away in the cracks of civilization. Their very irrelevance is their identity. Theirs is not a story of glory, but of secrecy. Not a tale of triumph, but of shame. And in that way, the most isolated faction in Skyrim perfectly embodies the god they serve. No one remembers the feast you attended in the shadows. No one cares that a priest lies dead, consumed by his fellow citizens. But you remember the cold stone table, the sound of the knife, the faces of ordinary people revealed as monsters. You remember the ring, warm with power yet heavy with its guilt. And as you walk out into Skyrim's open air, you realise something chilling. The Coven of Namira still exists. They are still out there hiding in plain sight. And that makes them the most isolated faction in Skyrim. So forgotten, so irrelevant that perhaps they exist for no reason at all. And maybe that's what makes them so unforgettable. Skyrim is a province of loud locations. Black Reach glows beneath the earth. Sovereign Guard burns in golden myth. The throat of the world scrapes the sky. But some places whisper. This place is one of those. Tucked quietly in the mountains southeast of Helgen, this cave rarely appears in discussions about Skyrim's most mysterious or most dangerous locations. It isn't tied to a Daedric prince, it isn't part of the main quest. It doesn't contain a legendary artifact that players obsess over. And yet, it might be one of the strangest, most overlooked locations in the entire province. Because South Fringe Sanctum is not just a cave, it's a borderland refuge, a political statement, a forgotten experiment in coexistence. And almost nobody goes there. To understand why South Fringe Sanctum is so unexplored, you have to look at where it sits. It's near Helgen, a location players rush through in the opening hours of the game. But after Helgen burns and the tutorial ends, most players never return to that stretch of wilderness unless a quest demands it. And South Fringe Sanctum never demands anything. There is no radiant bounty sending you there early on, no major faction quest that points you towards it, and no NPC in Riverwood whispers rumours about it. It exists quietly, almost defiantly off the beaten path. Skyrim trains players to follow markers, rumours, and dramatic events. South Fringe Sanctum offers none of those hooks. You only find it if you deliberately explore the mountain ridges and cold edges near the southern border, which means most players never see it at all. And that's exactly what makes it fascinating. When you finally enter this cave, you expect bandits, or Falmer, or vampires. Instead, you find something far stranger. The cave is occupied primarily by hostile mages, conjurers, alchemists, and refugees from the College of Winterhold. These are not typical enemy necromancers chanting in ritual circles. They are mages who have withdrawn from society. Some were expelled from the college, some left voluntarily, some simply don't belong anywhere else. South Fringe Sanctum is not a lair. It's a refuge, more like. Inside, you find makeshift living quarters, alchemy tables, and quiet signs of domestic life. There is an air of seclusion rather than aggression. The inhabitants are defensive, yes, but not inherently malicious. It feels less like a dungeon and more like a hidden community. And that subtle difference makes the cave feel alive in a way most Skyrim locations never attempt. Geographically, South Fringe Sanctum sits near the southern border of Skyrim, close to Cyrodiil. And that matters. Skyrim's civil war rages across the province. The Thalmor hunt Talos worshippers. The College of Winterhold is mistrusted by nearly every hold. Magic itself is viewed with suspicion. Now imagine being a mage during this time. Where do you go? Not to Whiterun, they distrust magic. Not to Windhelm, they distrust outsiders. Not to Markarth, they distrust everyone. So you go south, you go to the mountains, you go somewhere no one will look. South Fringe becomes symbolic of something larger, the quiet exile of knowledge. It's a physical manifestation of how Skyrim pushes its intellectuals and mages to the margins. The province is loud about warriors and gods, but it is suspicious of scholars. And so the scholars disappear into caves. What makes South Fringe Sanctum even stranger is its proximity to Helgen. Helgen is where everything begins. It's the birthplace of the Dragonborn's story, the execution block, Alduin's return, the moment the world changes forever. Players remember Helgen vividly, the burning towers, the collapsing walls, the dragon overhead. And yet, just a short distance into the southern mountains, sits this cave, untouched by spectacle, untouched by destiny. That's the paradox. You start your journey in this region, you escape through its forests, you follow Hadvar or Ralof through its caves, you look back at Helgen's smoking ruins, and then you leave. You never think to climb higher, you never think to search the ridges, you never suspect that just beyond the path of your escape lies a hidden enclave of displaced mages. It's almost poetic. The most dramatic opening in Skyrim happens within the sight of one of its most overlooked sanctuaries. Helgen burns loudly, South Fringe waits quietly. One announces itself with fire and prophecy, the other hides in silence. And somehow, we remember only the flames. Unlike necromancer dens filled with corpses and ritual blood, South Fringe feels subdued. Yes, there are summoned creatures and magical defences. Yes, the inhabitants will attack if provoked. But there's no grand ritual, no Daedric shrine, no apocalyptic experiment unfolding. Instead, it feels like research. The cave contains alchemical ingredients, spell tomes, and study areas. It suggests that these mages are continuing their craft in isolation, refining magic away from political interference. It almost feels peaceful, which makes it deeply unusual. Skyrim rarely portrays magic outside of extremes, either heroic or monstrous. South Fringe Sanctum presents something in between. It's not evil, it's not good, it's simply removed. And that quiet neutrality may be why players overlook it. It doesn't shock, it doesn't terrify, it just exists. South Fringe Sanctum has no major questline attached to it. It only has 1 or 2 artifacts that draws you in, but the most prominent feature of South Fringe is the mage that is trapped within, and her name is Sloveni. It's optional in the purest sense. You don't need to go there to free her. But that optionality reveals something important about Skyrim's design philosophy. Bethesda built a world where not every place revolves around the player. Some places exist independently. The Sanctum does not care whether you discover it. Its inhabitants were surviving before you arrived and would continue to survive if you never came. That gives it an eerie authenticity. In a game where dragons wait for your arrival and Daedric princes single you out as chosen champion, South Fringe Sanctum feels refreshingly indifferent. It doesn't need you, and that makes it feel real. The College of Winterhold presents itself as a bastion of magical study in Skyrim, but it is also exclusive, political, and heavily scrutinised. Some mages are expelled, others leave in frustration. The college's leadership walks a careful line to avoid angering the Jarls. South Fringe Sanctum represents what happens to mages who fall through those cracks. It's not a rebellion against the college, it's what's left over. And that's quietly tragic. These aren't villains plotting conquest. They are displaced scholars trying to continue their work. Somewhere the world won't judge them. In that sense, the cave feels more human than most magical locations in the game. It shows us what magic looks like when stripped of glory. Skyrim is filled with grand ruins and dramatic dungeons, but its most interesting stories are often the ones that don't demand your attention. South Fringe Sanctum doesn't scream, it doesn't glow, it doesn't threaten the world. It simply exists, carved into stone, filled with displaced scholars, sitting quietly at the edge of a province too busy fighting itself to notice. And perhaps that's why it's the most unexplored place in all of Skyrim. Because in a world obsessed with dragons and destiny, the quietest stories are the easiest to miss. But they are often the most revealing. Every corner of Skyrim has its purpose. Whiterun serves as the beating heart of the Civil War and the Dragon Crisis. Riften has corruption, thieves, and guild politics. Dawnstar suffers under the weight of Daedric nightmares, while Falkreath lies hidden in the shadow of grief and death. Even the smallest villages, Riverwood, Iverstead, Karth Wasteland, hold meaning as quest hubs, emotional touchpoints, or necessary crossroads. And then there's Dragon Bridge. It has a name, it has a marker, it has people, homes, and a claim to fame. The massive bridge that gives it life. But still, Dragon Bridge often goes unseen. Travellers pass through, adventurers barely glance at all. And the story of Skyrim hardly pauses to acknowledge it, only until the very end of the game. This is the loneliness of Dragon Bridge, a town balanced precariously between importance and invisibility, a settlement remembered more for its structure than for its people. Dragon Bridge sits in the northeastern corner of Skyrim, along the Karth River, just before the road curves towards Solitude. From a geographic standpoint, this should make it one of the most critical towns in the province. It serves as the final settlement before Skyrim's capital, sitting on a road that countless merchants, travellers and soldiers must have used over centuries. Its great bridge, built from ancient Nordic stone and watched over by dragon carvings, connects two sides of the Karth River in a dramatic, symbolic display of strength. And yet, despite the prime location, Dragon Bridge still feels like a ghost of relevance. Not many people really come here. It lacks the bustle of a trading post, the defences of a border fort, or the vibrancy of a waypoint town. For many players, it is nothing more than a road stop they barely register before riding onward to Solitude. It is a town perched on the edge, not just geographically, but narratively as well. The true star of Dragon Bridge is, of course, the bridge itself. Massive, stone-carved and ancient, the bridge dominates the settlement, flanked by imposing dragon heads carved into its sides. It stands as one of the most striking architectural landmarks in all of Skyrim. It's functional as well, allowing trade, armies and travellers to cross the roaring Karth River. But therein lies the problem. The bridge overshadows the town. When players hear the name Dragon Bridge, they think of the structure, not the settlement. The bridge is a landmark, a screenshot-worthy backdrop, a place that feels connected to Skyrim's mythic past. And the town? It's just a cluster of wooden houses that pale in comparison. The result is a place where the town exists in service to the bridge, not the other way around. And without it, Dragon Bridge might not even exist. What makes Dragon Bridge so unseen is not just its size, but its function. It is not a destination, it is a transition. Players ride through it on the way to Solitude. Couriers sprint past it. Even quests that mention Dragon Bridge rarely linger here for long until you're in the end game. The settlement has no inn, beyond a humble tavern-like home. No guild hall, no market, no reason for the player to settle or stay. When you walk into the tavern, there is barely anyone there other than one person. In this way, Dragon Bridge embodies the feeling of being looked at but not seen. It is acknowledged as a waypoint, but rarely experienced as a place. Like a rest stop on a highway, it's there, it's real, but you move past it almost immediately. Dragon Bridge actually has quite a few residents. A lot of named NPCs live here, tending to their homes, raising families, and working the surrounding lands. There's the lumberman who keeps the sawmill running, and Fader who tends to her home and hearth. Yet these characters feel like shadows of themselves. They offer little dialogue and barely any quests, and they rarely tie into Skyrim's broader web of politics and myth. Compare this to Riverwood's blacksmith, who arms you for the journey, or Iverstead's townfolk, who beg you to climb the throat of the world. In Dragon Bridge, the people just exist, but they never truly speak. They are present, but unheard, mirroring the unseen nature of the town itself. One exception to Dragon Bridge's obscurity lies in the Penitus Oculatus outpost. This outpost, the Emperor's personal guard and intelligence service, establishes a small stronghold here. For a moment, this gives Dragon Bridge significance, especially if you join the Dark Brotherhood questline. The outpost becomes a target, a reminder of the Empire's reach and the shadows trying to destroy it. And yet, even this fleeting spotlight seems to fade somewhat quickly. Once the relevant quest is over, the outpost remains, but it holds no further purpose. The Penitus Oculatus stand watch in a town where no one visits, guarding against threats that never come. It is emblematic of Dragon Bridge itself, poised for importance but quickly abandoned by the narrative. Again, geographically, Dragon Bridge sits at a political crossroads. It lies near Solitude, the heart of the Imperial power in Skyrim, but it also rests close to the Reach, a territory long contested between Nords, Imperials, and the native Forsworn. Its location makes it a natural choke point, a settlement that should hold strategic significance in the Civil War, but once again, this potential remains unused. The Stormcloaks never seize it, the Imperials never fortify it, the Forsworn never attack it. It is a place of potential battles, but not of actual ones. A stage built for a play that never comes. What strikes many players the most about Dragon Bridge is its silence. Other small towns hum with some sort of life. Miners at work in Darkwater Crossing, dockhands moving cargo in Dawnstar, priests holding rituals in Kynesgrove. But Dragon Bridge often feels empty. Its residents are scattered, rarely seen outdoors, and the central road lacks bustle. This creates an atmosphere of quiet neglect. You ride in, the river is roaring below, the bridge looming overhead, and nothing really greets you. No guard, no market, no lively tavern really chatter. They just kind of hum in the night. Just a silence that feels out of place on such a major road. The most telling sign of Dragon Bridge's neglect is how little the game uses it for storytelling. Beyond the endgame and Penitus Oculatus and a single bounty quest, Dragon Bridge is barely referenced. No Daedric prince stirs trouble here. No guild recruits you from its homes. No artifact lies buried beneath its soil. Only once you get to the later quests is where it becomes significant. It exists as a setting without a story, a name on a map that offers almost nothing for most of the game. Compared to places like Shaw's Stone or Whiterun, both of which tie directly into mining conflicts and quests for most of the game, Dragon Bridge feels like a town deliberately overlooked. To truly understand Dragon Bridge's invisibility, it helps to compare it with other small towns. Riverwood anchors the beginning of the main quest. Iverstead leads to High Hrothgar. Kyne's Grove hosts a dragon resurrection. Shaw's Stone ties into the Thieves Guild and mining economy. Whiterun struggles with Imperial overreach and the Silverblood family. Each of these towns matter to an extent, if only briefly. Dragon Bridge, by contrast, never earns the moment. Even though its bridge is unforgettable and towards the end the town actually means something, the town attached to it still slips from memory almost as soon as you leave. It is the town that matters less than its landmark, and in that sense perhaps the most unseen of them all. And yet players do remember Dragon Bridge. They remember the bridge's dragon heads, the roar of the river below, the sense of passing something ancient and monumental. They may not remember the names of its residents or the quests that it had but still lacked, but they surely remember the feeling of being there. Dragon Bridge lingers not because of what it offers, but because of what it withholds. It feels like a town caught in suspension, a place that should have mattered but really doesn't. That emptiness tends to make it more memorable. Dragon Bridge is possibly Skyrim's most unseen town. It has the bones of significance, location, architecture, history, but it is given none of the narrative flesh that makes Skyrim's other settlements thrive. It is a place you pass through, a landmark overshadowing the lives of those who live beside it. And maybe that's the point, because not every town in Skyrim can be the heart of a questline, the spark of a Daedric tale, or the site of a dragon battle. Some exist only to remind us of the quiet ones, the places the world doesn't see, but which still go on existing anyway. Dragon Bridge stands eternal, the bridge that everyone notices and the town that no one does. In Skyrim, every place has a name, every ruin has a story, every cave has a bandit, a necromancer, a ghost with unfinished business. You can pick almost any point on the map and someone, some faction, some book, some loose thread of narrative will eventually guide you there. And yet, some places don't feel like they were ever meant to be found. Some places feel like they slipped through the cracks, built, textured, maybe even plotted out, and then quietly left behind. No quest markers, no radiant objectives, no dialogue hints from a drunken NPC in a tavern, just a name on a map. If you're lucky, a cold, unlabeled door, if you're not. This is one of those places. No one ever tells you to go there, no one even mentions it. But if you wander far enough east of Riften, past the stables, across the river, up the rocky slope towards the edge of the mountain, you might see it. A wooden scaffolding, a crumbling mine entrance. A place the world seems to have forgotten. The Lost Prospect Mine doesn't open with a bang. It's not like Bleak Falls Barrow with its towering arches and blaring music cues. There's no combat encounter waiting at the threshold, no trap to dodge. You walk in and the world just gets quieter. The first room is small, dusty. A minecart is tipped over, gold ore litters the floor, glittering faintly in the gloom. There's a lantern, a pickaxe, and water, the sound of it faint and rhythmic deeper inside. At this point, you're thinking, okay, standard abandoned mine, probably some skeevers, maybe a dead bandit with a journal and a minor treasure. But then you notice something strange. There are no enemies at all. None. Just tunnels and silence. As you move deeper, the mine widens. You reach a larger cavern, water running through it, and a series of ledges above you. There's a broken ladder, a few more carts, and you start to wonder what actually happened here. Why was it abandoned, and why did no one ever come back? And then, in a narrow side chamber, you find him. A corpse. 2 corpses, actually. A man and a woman dead, frozen together. Next to him is a letter. It's short, rambling. If you read it and realize this wasn't a mine that was closed by force. It wasn't overrun by spiders or something dark. It was closed because of obsession. The prospector believed there was more gold here, a lot more. His partners didn't believe him, they left, but he stayed. Kept digging, kept dreaming until the dream became all there was. The note ends with something like, "I'm close, I can feel it." And then he died right there. A pickaxe on the floor, a lantern running out of oil, and nothing else to say for him. There's no boss at the end of Lost Prospect Mine. No chest full of rare loot. No artifact waiting on a pedestal. If you climb the ledges above and navigate the broken scaffolds and explore every inch, you'll find a few extra gold veins. But that's it. Just some ore. Which in a game like Skyrim feels strange. Wrong, even. You've been trained to expect more. Big reveal, big reward, big battle. But the Lost Prospect Mine doesn't care about any of that. It gives you a name, a dead man, and a story you have to finish in your own head. And then it gives you nothing else, because that's what obsession leaves behind. Skyrim is loud, in most of the right ways. Dragons scream through the clouds, swords clash, lightning crackles from your fingertips. But every now and then, the game gets quiet. Not just visually, but thematically and emotionally. The Lost Prospect Mine is one of those places. You don't come here for gold, you come here to remember what ambition sounds like after it's burnt out. This mine didn't collapse in a battle. It didn't get swallowed by the war. It wasn't cursed or haunted or corrupted. It was simply forgotten. Like a dream you thought was real until you wake up and realize no one else had it but you. And that maybe is why this place matters so much. Because it doesn't matter. Because someone once believed it did. Skyrim is a game that usually over-explains. It gives you journals, dialogue trees, exposition dumps, quest markers, flashing arrows, and redundant monologues from people who really want to tell you about their missing sword. But this mine doesn't really explain anything. You have to connect to the dots. The prospector's note, the layout of the mine, the empty scaffolding, the fact that by the time you reach the deepest point in the cave, the gold is there, but the person who needed to see it never made it. And he was right, there was more gold, but that doesn't matter because he's dead now. And no one else cared enough to come back, not even to bury him. There's a type of location in Skyrim I've started thinking of as a pre-quest. These are places that feel like they were meant to have something tied to them. A Daedric artifact, a moral dilemma, a branching story about trust and betrayal. But for some reason, the part never got written. This location in Skyrim, the Lost Prospect Mine, feels like a pre-quest. You could build a whole story out of it. Maybe the prospector was cursed. Maybe the mine was a front for something darker. Maybe there's more gold, but every time someone comes for it, they vanish. But the game doesn't do that. It leaves the door open. And that's rarer than you think in a game like Skyrim. If you were to draw a map of Skyrim, not just the geography, but the psychology of its places, the Lost Prospect Mine would be a little dot at the edge of ambition. It's about what happens when you believe in something no one else does. It's about digging and digging and digging and never hitting bedrock. It's about thinking that if you just go a little further, if you just try a little harder, you'll eventually get the reward you were promised. And it's about how that promise can kill you. And it's about how the world might never even notice you're gone. Because the mine is so tucked away, so out of the public's eye that no one will ever think to go there other than prospectors. There are players who will never enter the Lost Prospect Mine. They'll walk past it, ride past it, maybe even glance at it while chasing something bigger. And that's okay. because the game doesn't ask you to go there. But that's what makes it feel real, because the world is full of forgotten places. Houses with the lights off, offices with dust on desks, buildings with no footprints in the snow. Not every location gets a headline. Not every place gets a purpose. Some places exist simply because someone once needed them to, and then stopped. In most of Skyrim, gold means something, right? It's currency, it's value, it's the reward. But in the mine, gold is something else. It's the object of fixation, the illusion of purpose, the thing that a man clung to while the rest of the world moved on. And in that context, the gold in the mine isn't a treasure, it's a tombstone. You can mine it if you want, you can even sell it. But part of you knows this wasn't meant for you at all. It was meant for someone who never got to hold it. The Lost Prospect mine doesn't change. It doesn't scale with your level, it doesn't respawn, it doesn't evolve. It doesn't care if you're level 5 or level 50. You walk in, you see the story, and you walk out. It waits for you, but it doesn't need you. And when you leave, I bet it doesn't miss you either. Which makes it feel more real than half the quest hubs in the game. It's a scar and not a wound. Not everything in Skyrim is meant to be remembered. Some stories don't echo through the taverns, some places don't get marked on your map. Some people live and die between the lines of dialogue, between the cracks in the cave walls, between the Radiant events and the dragon fights. The Lost Prospect Mine is one of those places. And maybe that's why I keep thinking about it, because I forgot it once as well. But now, I can't. In Skyrim, danger is usually loud. Dragons scream across the sky, bandits shout as they draw blades, magic crackles in the hands of those who defy the Nine. But not all danger announces itself. Some of Skyrim's most haunting places aren't in crypts or Daedric shrines. They're the quiet places, locations that don't offer gold or quests, places the game barely acknowledges. Places like Unger's Mill and Heartwood Mill, two isolated lumber mills, two quiet homes, one defined by loneliness, the other by grief. But neither one of them gets closure. But they're both pretty easy to miss, unless you stop, and unless you listen. Unger's Mill lies along the river, just east of Windhelm. There's almost no drama, it's just a dock, a house, and a water wheel, and a woman named Aerie. She and the two others working here are the sole residents, and Aerie is the one running the mill. She has no spouse, all her family have died, no guards, just her dog and the sound of wood being chopped. She speaks with a kind of quiet practicality. She offers you firewood, work, and that's about it. Her life is functional, self-contained, but unmistakably hollow. There's no tension here, but there's also no warmth. And the longer you stand in the mill's silence, the more it feels like a place waiting for someone who never came. Aerie is one of Skyrim's most easily overlooked characters. She has no questline, no deep dialogue tree, and no mention in any other storyline. But that simplicity is what makes her kind of interesting. She inherited the mill from her father. We're told this in passing, but that's about it. No legacy, no pride, no tradition, just responsibility. She doesn't complain, she doesn't lament her isolation, but her quiet rhythms, chopping firewood, tending the house, watching the river, feel less like choices and more like repetition, survival through routine. This isn't really grief, is it? It's something colder, something lonelier. And the game leaves her in that cycle indefinitely. Every time you come back, she'll be doing the same thing over and over again. Across the map west of Riften, you find Heartwood Mill, resting on the southern shore of Lake Onrich. The layout is nearly identical to Unger's Mill, a house, a mill, and an NPC. But this one, Grosta, doesn't live in silence. She's angry because her husband left months ago and never returned. And unlike Aerie, Grosta actually talks about it. She believes he's dead, and she's bitter that he left them alone with the work, her and her son. And she says it plainly, "If you see my husband, tell him to get his sorry carcass home." But if you've already been to Trevor's Watch, a nearby fortress overrun by bandits, you end up knowing the truth. Grosta's husband is dead, face down in the mud. Eventually, after you finish the quest Fight or Flight, you can eventually tell Grosta that her husband has seemingly died. And when you tell her, she gets mixed feelings of sadness and relief. On opposite sides of Skyrim, two mills turn in silence. In one, Aerie works somewhat alone, bound by inheritance and isolation. In the other, Grosta lives with open grief, abandoned by a man whose fate she will never learn until you come around. These aren't loud stories. There's no quest markers, no rewards, just a feeling that someone once planned to say more but never did. Or maybe that someone knew saying less would leave the deepest impression. Because Skyrim rarely punishes players for not paying attention, but it rewards those who do. It's tempting to see these stories as unfinished content, cut quests, missing dialogue, lost design notes. But they're not unfinished. Maybe they're just open-ended. Grosta only finds out about her husband until you, the player, come around and do the quest. Aerie never leaves her mill. You can't change their outcomes. And that's what makes these places feel so human. In the real world, grief doesn't always come with answers. And loneliness doesn't always end in romance. Sometimes the world just goes on, and the world doesn't stop for it. And that is the same thing in Skyrim. Skyrim is full of life in certain places. Cities bustle, inns echo with bard songs and drunken laughter. Even the sawmills in places like Riverwood, Solitude or Riften are hubs of daily routine. Workers hauling logs, merchants barking prices, travellers passing through. These locations feel inhabited, interconnected and alive. But not Unger's Mill, and certainly not Heartwood Mill. Barely any travellers pass through it. These places feel separate, not just geographically but spiritually as well. They exist outside the rest of the Skyrim world. There are no other workers on Heartwood Mill, no buyers coming to haul timber, no carts loaded for shipment. Their lumber wheels just turn, but there's no one to collect the product. At Unger's Mill and Heartwood Mill, there's only routine. They're just refusing to stop. And that's what makes them kind of unsettling. They're not really abandoned, they're just half alive. What makes these mills even stranger is how untouched they are. They lie in Civil War territory, surrounded by unrest but remain completely unaffected. No soldiers, no guards, and no bandits. They seem protected and somewhat preserved. Or they could just be forgotten, which makes them feel like echoes. Places left behind by the world, still functioning, but no longer relevant in the Skyrim era. They're still spinning, yes, but only because no one told them to stop. Back at Unger's Mill, Aerie doesn't have a missing husband. She isn't grieving anyone other than her father, which she rarely even shows signs of grieving. But that doesn't make her story any less heavy. Her mill is a monument to self-reliance. She lives there because she has to, because someone must keep the place running, because something about that wheel turning is tied to who she is and who her family was. But what happens when that wood eventually does run out? What happens when the storms come? Aerie is the kind of character who won't ask for help, and the game won't offer it. She barely has any dialogue herself. She's not broken, she's just alone. And in Skyrim, that might be worse than getting an arrow to the knee or getting brutally murdered by an ogre. But once you're finished looking at these mills, the water keeps moving, the wheel keeps turning, Grosta and Aerie keep chopping wood, and the player just keeps walking. But something about these places do tend to stay with you, like a lot of things in Skyrim. Because Skyrim is a land of heroes, but also of forgotten people, forgotten places, and stories that only complete themselves if you're willing to notice them. The mills don't shout, they endure. And that somehow makes them the most haunting locations of all. In the far northern reaches of Skyrim, nestled between frost-bitten cliffs and blizzards that never rest, lies a place few known, and even fewer survive. The Chill. To most, it's not even a location. They've never heard of it, never seen it on the map, and certainly never dared to stumble into it by chance. It doesn't announce itself, nor does it offer the illusion of justice and fairness. Instead, it whispers a warning in the howling wind. This is where Winterhold sends those they wish forgotten. And within its glacial prison walls lies the skeletal remains of prisoners long dead. Silent, frozen figures who raise more questions than answers. The Chill is unlike any other prison in Skyrim. It is the only hold facility not managed by jailers or city guards, but by conjured frost atronics. Elemental beings of ice who offer no sympathy, no nourishment, and no reprieve. And in the farthest corners of this glacial cave, you find them. Locked cages, bedrolls iced over with time, and the bones of those who never left. But who are they? Why are they left to die? And what does this unassuming location tell us about Winterhold, the college, and the darker undercurrents of Skyrim's justice system? The Chill is not labelled on any map and cannot be found through exploration alone. In fact, the only way most players discover it is through an arrest in the hold of Winterhold, one of the least populated and most isolated regions in Skyrim. When you choose imprisonment over a fine in this hold, instead of waking up in a city cell, you awaken in a cave. The walls are slick with frost, the air is heavy with silence, the cells are small, metallic cages with adept-level locks. 3 of them line the cave's walls. Each cage contains a bedroll, some bones, and all emit a chilling aura of neglect. But unlike other jails in Skyrim, there is no exit mechanism, no waiting guard to release you after time has passed. This is a place where you are meant to escape or die in. But what truly sets the Chill apart is what you find when you look closely at the details. 2 of the cages contain human remains. There are no journals, no named markers, no dialogue triggers to identify them. The game offers no quest or backstory. It gives you only the image of these bones, curled up on bedrolls, sealed behind iron bars. The implication is bleak. These were real prisoners, once alive, who died from exposure, starvation, or perhaps even at the hands of the frost trolls themselves. One cannot help but wonder, why are they so forgotten? Were they simply low-level criminals the Jarl wished to dispose of? Were they mages cast out of the College of Winterhold for breaking rules that went too far? Or were they political prisoners? People whose continued existence threatened the fragile order of a crumbling hold. There is one possibility that adds a particularly tragic angle. The college has a dark history. Members involved in necromancy, Daedric worship, and magical incidents have vanished with little explanation. These skeletal remains may be proof of those stories, evidence that the college doesn't exile its most dangerous members to the wilds, but locks them away in the Chill, where their mistakes can be quietly erased. While every other hold in Skyrim uses guards and jailers to maintain order, Winterhold relies on the frost trolls, summoned ice elementals. This is more than a mere aesthetic choice. It's emblematic of how Winterhold views its prisoners, not as citizens who've broken the law, but as expendables. People unworthy of even basic human dignity. These frost atronarchs don't feed, speak, or care. They won't hesitate to kill a prisoner attempting to escape. And their cold, mindless efficiency makes them the perfect tools for silent execution. If a prisoner were to die of starvation or illness, no guard would know. No reports would be filed, no one would ever visit the Chill to retrieve their body. This system absolves any human of moral responsibility. It allows the authorities of Winterhold, whether the Jarl or the college, to maintain plausible deniability. The Chill operates like a machine, and the Frost Atronarchs are its gears. Players have speculated wildly over the years about who the skeletons in the chill may have been. Some theorists suggest that they could be remnants of the Great Collapse, the mysterious cataclysm that destroyed much of Winterhold and left the city in ruins. Perhaps in the chaos, the Jarl's court turned to the cruel punishments to maintain control. Others think the bones could belong to mages who dabbled in Daedric rituals or Black Soul gem magic, criminal acts even in the arcane lenient halls of the college. Reddit and the Elder Scrolls forums have pointed to possible connections with the Sigic Order or the remnants of the Mythic Dawn, hiding in plain sight and eliminated when discovered. Still, others believe the prisoners may not be criminals at all, but scapegoats. People who knew too much about the college's experiments or who bore witness to things the Jarl's court wanted buried. There's also the uncanny silence about the chill in-game. No NPC mentions it, not even the guards or mages. You only hear about it when you're going to jail. It's almost as if everyone in Winterhold is pretending it doesn't exist. This kind of narrative omission is pretty rare in Skyrim, and often a signal that something darker lurks beneath the surface. The use of magic for containment and execution is a theme deeply ingrained in Skyrim's lore, but in the chill, that theme is taken to its coldest extreme. Unlike the Dwemer ruins, this isn't a mystical place meant to awe, it's meant to erase. Prisoners here aren't just locked away, they're deleted. No one comes looking for them and no one knows their names. It's a brutal metaphor for the unchecked power of Winterhold's institution. The Jarl, weakened and powerless, in a hold lost to time, may be clinging to order by any means. The college, unregulated and secretive, could be using the chill as a dumping ground for their mistakes. And that makes the skeletons more than just a set dressing. They are narrative relics, fossils of a system that no longer sees justice as rehabilitation, but as erasure. Skyrim is full of mysteries, but few are as quietly chilling as the chill. The prison offers no quests, no dialogue, no direct lore, but it tells a story all the same. Through its design, its silence, and the forgotten bones of the prisoners, it paints a picture of a hold struggling to maintain power, a college guarding its secrets, and a justice system that would rather you freeze in silence than be heard in defiance. The skeletons remain not just as relics of failed escapes or neglected prisoners, but as symbols of a broader truth in Skyrim. Sometimes the coldest places aren't just made of ice, they're made of indifference. And in the end, maybe that's the scariest mystery of all. Because even in Skyrim, it's very rare to see something as neglected as this. Skyrim is a land filled with noise. Dragons tear through the skies. Cities bustle with life. Dungeons echo with the sounds of battle and discovery. Everywhere you go, the world seems to demand your attention. But not every place in Skyrim is like that. Some locations don't fight to be seen. They don't offer quests, rewards, or even clear stories. They sit quietly at the edges of the map, easy to miss and even easier to forget. These are the empty places, the abandoned ones, the locations that feel less like part of a game and more like something left behind. Some rest along the frozen northern coast. Some lay bare in bustling areas in Markarth. But when you first come into contact with an empty place, you realise something. No movement, no inhabitants, no explanation. Just the remains of something that didn't last. And in a world as loud and eventful as Skyrim, that kind of emptiness stands out more than anything else. Clam Digger's Camp is the kind of place most players will walk past without ever realising it exists. And in a game like Skyrim, that says a lot. It sits quietly along the northern coast, east of Dawnstar, where the Sea of Ghosts stretches endlessly into a pale, frozen horizon. There are no dramatic ruins here, no towering Nordic structures carved into the mountains, no glowing markers pulling you in with the promise of something important. Just a small, weathered camp pressed against the shoreline, exposed to the wind, the cold, and the constant sound of waves breaking against ice. At first glance, it barely feels like a location at all. A few bedrolls, a cooking spit, scattered tools, and the faint suggestion that someone once tried to live here. But that's all it is, a suggestion. There are no active inhabitants, no quests to guide you, no narrative thread to follow. It exists in a strange liminal space between presence and absence, where everything points to human activity, but nothing remains to confirm it. And that emptiness is what makes it so interesting, because Clam Digger's camp isn't just abandoned, it feels forgotten. Not in the dramatic, tragic way that Skyrim often presents its ruins, with skeletons posed mid-story, or journals spelling out exactly what went wrong, but in a quieter, more unsettling way. There's no clear explanation for why it was left behind. No signs of struggle, no obvious danger, no final moment preserved in time. Whoever was here simply isn't anymore. And the game offers no answers as to why. That lack of context creates a very different kind of atmosphere, one that relies entirely on implication rather than exposition. You're left to fill in the gaps yourself, to imagine what life might have been like in a place like this. And more importantly, what could have driven someone to leave it behind? The location itself doesn't help much. The northern coast of Skyrim is one of the most inhospitable regions in the game. It's cold, isolated, and largely devoid of meaningful activity. Unlike the forests of Falkreath or the plains of Whiterun, there's very little sense of life here. The environment feels static, almost indifferent, as if it would remain exactly the same whether anyone lived there or not. And that indifference is key to understanding why this camp feels the way it does. It's not just empty, it's insignificant. Not in a designed sense, but a narrative one. This isn't a place the world cares about. It's not strategically important, not culturally relevant, not even particularly useful beyond the small, mundane act of gathering clams along the shore. Which raises an interesting question. Why was anyone here in the first place? The idea of someone choosing to live in such a harsh, isolated environment suggests a kind of quiet desperation. Maybe they were trying to get away from something. Maybe they had no other options. Or maybe they were simply drawn to the solitude, to the idea of existing at the very edge of the world where no one would bother them. Skyrim never tells you, and that uncertainty becomes part of the experience. It transforms the camp from a simple environmental detail into something more reflective, something that invites interpretation rather than delivering a very clear answer. And in doing so, it highlights one of the more subtle strengths of Skyrim's world design: its ability to create meaning through absence. Most of the game's more memorable locations rely on spectacle: massive ruins, dramatic lighting, enemies waiting to challenge you. Clam Digger's camp does the opposite. It removes all that. There's no danger here, no reward, no sense of progression. Just a quiet space that exists entirely outside the player's usual motivations. And because of that, it's easy to ignore. There's nothing pulling you in, nothing demanding your attention. You have to choose to stop, to look around, to consider what you're seeing. In a world filled with noise, dragons, quests, battles, constant movement, places like this create contrast. They slow things down. They give the player a moment to step outside the usual loop of action and reward and just exist in the space. And while that experience might not be as immediately engaging, it lingers in a different way, not as a memorable event, but as a feeling, a sense of quiet, of absence, of something that used to be there and isn't anymore. And in a game as large and as busy as Skyrim, that kind of emptiness can be just as meaningful as anything else. Deep Folk Crossing is one of those places in Skyrim that feels important the moment you see it. And yet, the longer you stay there, the more that importance begins to unravel into something quieter, something far more hollow. Located high in the mountains north of Markarth, it stretches across a deep chasm in the form of a massive Dwemer bridge, an imposing structure of stone and metal that immediately suggests purpose, scale, and history. From a distance, it looks like a landmark, the kind of place that should lead somewhere or guard something, or at the very least tell a story worth hearing. But when you finally arrive, when you step onto the bridge itself and take in your surroundings, what you're met with is not discovery, but absence. There are no bustling ruins here, no hidden city beneath it, no sprawling dungeon waiting to be explored. Just the bridge suspended over nothing, connecting one quiet stretch of mountain to another. And that's what makes Deep Folk Crossing so strangely compelling. It feels like a piece of something much larger. But whatever it once connected to is gone, leaving behind only this isolated fragment. The Dwemer, known for their advanced architecture and sprawling underground cities, built structures with clear intent. Their ruins are usually dense, complex, and filled with purpose. But this bridge stands apart from that pattern. It doesn't lead into a ruin. It doesn't act as an entrance or a gateway. It simply exists, elevated and exposed, as if it was once part of a system that has long since disappeared. And that creates a unique kind of emptiness. Not the emptiness of a place that was abandoned in a hurry, but the emptiness of something that has outlived its own function. There's a difference between a location that feels unfinished and one that feels forgotten. And Deep Folk Crossing sits firmly in the latter category. It doesn't feel like it was meant to be more and never became it. It feels like it was once part of something meaningful, something complete, and over time that context eroded until only this single structure remained. The environment around it reinforces that feeling. The mountains are quiet, the air still, the sounds coming from the wind and the distant wildlife that barely interacts with the space. There are no NPCs living there, no signs of recent activity, no evidence that anyone has tried to reclaim or repurpose the structure. It's not dangerous, not particularly rewarding, and not tied to any major quest, which means most players will visit it once, if at all, and then move on without much thought. But if you stop and look at it, really look at it, the bridge starts to feel less like a location and more like a question. Why is it here? What did it connect to? Why build something so large in such an isolated place when you can just go around? Skyrim never answers these questions, and that silence becomes part of the experience. It forces you to confront the idea that not every piece of the world is meant to be understood, that some places exist purely as remnants of a past that can no longer be fully reconstructed. And that idea ties into something larger about the Dwemer themselves. They are one of the most mysterious civilizations in the Elder Scrolls universe, known as much for their sudden disappearance as for their technological achievements. Their ruins are scattered across Skyrim, each one hinting at a culture that was both advanced and deeply enigmatic. But most of those ruins still function, in a way. They still have mechanisms, enemies, systems that give them a sense of presence. Deep Folk Crossing doesn't have any of that. It's static, silent, completely removed from the systems that define other Dwemer locations. And because of that, it feels closer to a monument than a ruin. Not something to explore, but something to observe. A structure that has lost its context, but retained its form. And that creates a different kind of atmosphere, one that leans heavily into isolation. Standing on the bridge, surrounded by open sky and distant mountains, you're not thinking about combat or loot or progression. You're thinking about scale, about time, about the idea that something so massive could be reduced to something so empty. It's a reminder that Skyrim's world isn't just built around the player's journey. It's built on layers of history, many of which are incomplete, fragmented, or entirely missing. Deep Folk Crossing embodies that fragmentation in a way few other locations do. It's not just that it's empty, it's that its emptiness feels intentional, as if the game is deliberately presenting you with a piece of a puzzle that you'll never be able to solve. Kenstag Ruins are part of the unique places in Skyrim that feels less like a location and more like a fleeting memory, something you're not even meant to fully experience, only briefly witness before it disappears again. Situated east of Morthal in the fog-covered marshes of Yarmarch, the ruins themselves are already easy to miss. The region is flat, desolate, and choked with mist, the kind of environment where visibility is low and landmarks blur into one another. It's not a place players tend to explore thoroughly, and even when they do, Kenstag ruins don't immediately stand out. At first glance, it's just another set of crumbling Nordic stones, partially collapsed and swallowed by the surrounding swamp. There are no enemies waiting to ambush you, no obvious loot that draws you in, no quest marker pointing you towards its significance. It feels empty in the most literal sense. But what makes Kenstag Ruins truly unique and deeply unsettling is that its emptiness isn't consistent, and it changes. Under the right conditions at night, obscured by the ever-present fog, the ruins reveal something that feels almost like it shouldn't be there at all. A group of ghostly figures locked in an eternal silent standoff, both frozen in place as if time itself has been interrupted. There's no movement, no dialogue, no interaction. Just a moment suspended in stillness. And then, just as suddenly as they appear, they're gone. No explanation, no follow-up, no way to engage with what you just saw. The ruins return to their original state, empty, quiet, and seemingly insignificant. This is what sets these ruins apart from almost every other location in Skyrim. It doesn't just lack content, it withholds it. It gives you a glimpse of something meaningful, and then immediately takes it away, leaving you with more questions than answers. Most locations in the game are built around permanence. Enemies respawn, loot resets, environments remain largely unchanged. Kenstag Ruins breaks that pattern by introducing something temporary, something that exists outside the normal rules of the game world. And because of that, it feels less like a designed encounter and more like an anomaly. Something you weren't supposed to see, or at the very least, something that doesn't want to be understood. The figure themselves only deepen that sense of mystery. The ghost you see that leads you to a tomb where bandits are trying to rob is almost contradicting of the whole place entirely. It shows that even in the most abandoned places, the worries of life can still be seen, which makes this ruin even more haunting to this day. But the game never explains who they are, what their story is, or why this moment is being played here, in this forgotten corner of the map. There are no journals, no environmental clues other than the tomb that is being raided. It's just the image itself, stark and silent. It's a form of storytelling that relies entirely on implication, asking the player to interpret meaning from a single, unchanging scene. And in doing so, it creates a different kind of engagement. You're not uncovering a narrative piece by piece. You're confronting the absence of one, trying to make sense of something that refuses to be explained. The environment plays a crucial role in reinforcing this feeling. Yarmarch is already one of the most isolated and atmospheric regions in Skyrim. The constant fog, the mutated colours, the lack of major settlements. It all contributes to a sense of detachment from the rest of the world. Kenstag Ruins fits perfectly within that landscape. It doesn't break the silence, it becomes a part of it. And when the spectral figure appears, they don't disrupt the atmosphere so much as intensify it. They feel like a natural extension of the environment, as if the land itself is remembering something briefly before letting it fade again. This makes the ruins feel less like a physical space and more like a point where the boundaries between past and present blur. A place where something unresolved lingers, not actively, but passively, waiting to be seen by those who happen to pass through at the right moment. It's also worth noting how easy it is to miss this entirely. If you visit during the day or simply don't spend enough time in the area, you might never see the apparition at all. And in that case, Kenstag Ruins remains exactly what it appears to be, an empty, unremarkable set of stones in an already empty region. And that duality is part of what makes it so effective. The hunter's camp with the sulfur-soaking pools is one of the rare places in Skyrim where emptiness doesn't feel unsettling, but instead it almost feels comforting, like a quiet pocket of the world that exists completely separate from the chaos surrounding it. Located near Darkwater Crossing, a region otherwise defined by mining, hardship, and the looming presence of conflict, the camp sits beside a series of natural hot springs that gently steam against the cold air. The landscape here is striking in a way that doesn't demand attention, but rewards it. Pale mineral deposits ring the water, soft light reflects off the surface, and the constant hiss of sulfur vents creates a kind of ambient stillness that feels more alive than silent. It's the kind of place that feels like it should be more important than it is, or at the very least more populated. But it isn't. Instead, what you find here is a small, almost fragile presence of life. Just 3 hunters going about their routines with no sense of urgency, no larger narrative pulling them elsewhere. And despite their presence, the area still feels empty. Not abandoned, not forgotten, but intentionally sparse, as if the world itself is choosing to leave this place alone. That contrast is what makes the location so interesting. In most cases, emptiness in Skyrim is tied to loss or absence, places where something used to be and no longer is. But here, the emptiness exists alongside life. The hunters are not struggling to survive in a harsh environment, nor are they remnants of something greater that has fallen apart. They are simply there, existing in a space that doesn't require anything of them. There's no tension, no conflict, no underlying threat that needs to be resolved. Because of that, the camp feels remarkably stable, almost timeless in a way that few other locations in the game achieve. It's not waiting for something to happen. It's not building towards an event. It just is. And that sense of stillness creates a different kind of atmosphere, one that stands in stark contrast to the rest of the region. Darkwater Crossing, just a short distance away, is defined by labour and limitation, a mining settlement where people are tied to routine and obligation. Beyond that, Skyrim itself is a province of constant motion, dragons attacking, civil war unfolding, quests pulling the player in every direction. But at the sulfur-soaking pools, all of that feels distant, almost irrelevant. The world slows down here, the usual urgency fades, and in its place there's a kind of quiet appreciation for the environment itself. The sound of the water, the movement of the steam, the way that light interacts with the landscape, these details become more noticeable precisely because there's so little competing for your attention. It's a form of emptiness that enhances the experience rather than diminishing it. And yet, despite how inviting the location feels, it remains largely untouched. The fact that there are only 3 hunters here emphasises just how underutilised the space is. In a more typical design, a place like this would be a hub, a settlement, or at least a point of interest with multiple interactions. But Skyrim leaves it almost entirely alone. The hunters don't offer much in terms of dialogue or engagement. They don't anchor a quest or provide a deeper narrative. They simply occupy the space, giving it just enough life to prevent it from feeling abandoned, but not enough to make it feel busy. And that balance is what makes the emptiness so noticeable. It's not the absence of people, it's the absence of activity, the absence of purpose beyond simply being there, which in a game so often driven by goals and progression, feels almost unusual. You're not here to complete anything. You're not here to gain anything significant. You're just here. And that can feel surprisingly meaningful, because it highlights something that Skyrim rarely emphasises. The idea that not every location needs to serve a function. Some places can exist purely for their atmosphere, their mood, their ability to create a certain feeling. The Hunter's Camp is one of those places. It doesn't try to impress you with scale or complexity. It doesn't hide secrets or challenge you with enemies. Instead, it offers something much simpler, a moment of calm in a world that rarely slows down. and in doing so it becomes more memorable than many of the game's more populated areas. Because those places, while full of activity, are often defined by that activity. They're tied to the quests, to the characters, to the systems that keep the player moving forward. The pools, by contrast, ask nothing of you. It doesn't push you in any direction, and it doesn't even try to hold your attention. The burnt-down house in Morthal, the one at the centre of the Laid to Rest quest, is one of the clearest examples of how Skyrim uses emptiness, not just as atmosphere, but as contrast, placing something deeply unsettling right beside something that, on the surface, continues to function as normal. Morthal itself is already a strange town, quiet and fog-covered, lacking the energy of places like Whiterun or Solitude. But it is still lived in. People move about, conversations happen, routines continue. There is a sense of life, even if it's muted. And then there's the house, or what's left of it, sitting just off to the side, blackened and collapsed in on itself. It doesn't blend into the environment so much as disrupts it. It's a permanent scar on the town's landscape, something that cannot be ignored no matter how much the townsfolk might try to move past it. Unlike many abandoned locations in Skyrim, this one has a clear history, a known event tied to it, a fire that killed a woman and her child. But what makes it so effective isn't the event itself, it's what comes after. The house isn't rebuilt, it isn't cleaned up, it isn't repurposed, it's left exactly as it is. A charred skeleton of wood and ash, sitting in the middle of community that continues to exist around it. That decision creates a kind of tension that most locations in Skyrim don't have. The town is active, but this space within is not. It's empty in the most literal sense, devoid of life, but also heavy with implication. You're not just looking at a ruin, you're looking at something that people in the world actively know about, something recent enough to still matter, and yet it remains untouched. And that raises questions, not in the same mysterious, abstract way as places like Kenstag Ruins, but in a more grounded, human way. Why hasn't anything been done about this? Why is it still here out in the open instead of being cleared away or rebuilt? The answer implied through dialogue and the quest itself. It's that this situation isn't resolved. The fire wasn't just an accident. There's something wrong beneath the surface of Morthal, something the townspeople are aware of but hesitant to confront. And so the house remains, not just as a reminder of what happened, but as a symbol of that unresolved tension. It's not abandoned because it was forgotten. It's abandoned because no one wants to deal with what it represents. That distinction is important, because it shifts the nature of the emptiness. This isn't a place that time has moved past. It's a place that time is stuck on. The rest of Morthal continues forward. People go about their lives maintaining the appearance of normalcy, but the house anchors everything in place. It refuses to let the town fully move on. And when you approach it, when you step into the remains of the structure, that feeling becomes even more pronounced. There's very little to interact with, no enemies, no loot of significance, no complex layout to explore. Just debris, ash, and the faint outline of what used to be a home. It's quiet in a way that feels intentional, as if the game is asking you to sit with the space rather than do anything about it. And that stillness contrasts sharply with the idea of a home, a place that should be filled with warmth, activity, and life. Instead, you get the opposite: cold, silence, and absence. And yet, just like within the town itself, there's more beneath the surface. The Laid to Rest quest reveals that emptiness isn't entirely empty. The spirit of the child, Helgi, lingers, tied to the location in a way that blurs the line between presence and absence. This adds another layer to the space, turning it from a simple ruin into something more emotionally charged. It's no longer just about what was lost, but about what remains, not physically, but spiritually. Refugees Rest, located along the harsh eastern edge of Skyrim near the border of Morrowind and the Dunmouth Pass, is one of those locations that feels defined not by what's there, but by what should be there and isn't. At a glance, it appears to be exactly what the name suggests: a small makeshift shelter meant for people in transit. A temporary stop for those fleeing something behind them or searching for something ahead. There are a few basic supplies, a tent, signs of survival, rather than settlement. But despite that implication of movement, of passing through, the place feels completely still. There are no refugees when you arrive, no travellers resting, no voices, no sense that anyone has been there recently. It's not bustling, not even lightly occupied. It's just empty. And that emptiness carries a very different tone compared to the other abandoned places in Skyrim. This isn't a ruin reclaimed by time or a structure left behind after some dramatic event. It's a place built for people who never came. Or perhaps came and left so quietly that they may as well have never been there at all. The surrounding environment reinforces that feeling. This part of Skyrim is cold, jagged, and unwelcome, with the looming presence of Morrowind just beyond the mountains. The Dunmouth Pass itself suggests transition, a crossing point between regions, cultures, and histories. It's the kind of place where you would expect movement, especially in a world shaped by conflict, displacement, and political tension. The Red Mountain eruption, the ongoing instability in Morrowind, the border unrest across Tamriel, all of these factors imply that there should be people on the move, seeking refuge wherever they can find it. And yet, Refugees Rest stands alone, untouched by that movement. It feels like a preparation for something that never fully materialized, or perhaps a quiet acknowledgement of suffering that the game never directly shows. That absence becomes more striking the longer you consider it. Skyrim is filled with stories of war, exile, and hardship, but many of those stories are told through active quests or populated locations. Here the story is implied entirely through the name and the setting, without any characters to reinforce it. You're left to imagine the kinds of people who might have needed a place like this. Families fleeing their homes, individuals escaping conflict, travellers with nowhere else to go. And then you're confronted with the reality that none of them are here. The shelter exists, but the people it was meant for do not. This creates a subtle but powerful disconnection between expectation and reality. The name Refugees Rest suggests life, movement, and temporary community. What you find instead is silence, and that silence feels heavier because of what the name implies. It's not just an empty camp. It's an empty promise, a place that represents safety and relief, but offers neither in practice. This is where the location starts to feel less like physical space and more like a commentary on the world around it. Skyrim is a province caught in conflict, filled with political tension and social division. It's not a place particularly welcoming to outsiders, especially those arriving with nothing. The existence of Refugees Rest suggests that someone at some point recognized the need for a place like this. But its emptiness suggests that recognition wasn't enough. Whether due to the harshness of the environment, the lack of resources, or the broader indifference of the world, the space remains unused, and that unused state becomes part of its identity. Skyrim is often remembered for its scale, its noise, and its constant sense of movement. Dragons circle overhead, cities carry on with their routines, and quests pull you endlessly from one place to another. It's a world that feels alive, or at the very least, always in motion. But what these empty and abandoned places reveal is that Skyrim's world isn't defined solely by what's happening. It's equally shaped by what isn't. Each of these locations present a different kind of emptiness. Clam Digger's Camp shows us what it's like when a place is simply left behind with no clear explanation, only the quiet suggestion of a life that didn't last. Deep Fault Crossing turns absence into something structural, a massive piece of architecture that has outlived its purpose, standing as a fragment of something we've never fully understood. What ties all of these together is not just that they're empty, but how they are empty. Skyrim doesn't treat absence as a single idea. Sometimes it's peaceful, sometimes it's unsettling, sometimes it raises questions, and other times it refuses to answer them entirely. These places don't guide you, don't reward you, and often don't even acknowledge your presence. They simply exist, quietly at the edges of the world. And in doing so, they reveal something important. Not every story in Skyrim is told through action or dialogue. Some are told through silence, through stillness, through the spaces where something should be and isn't. Because in a world so full of noise, it's often the quietest places that leave the strongest impression. In the far northern reaches of Skyrim, nestled between frost-bitten cliffs and blizzards that never rest, lies a place few known, and even fewer survive. The Chill. To most, it's not even a location. They've never heard of it, never seen it on the map, and certainly never dared to stumble into it by chance. It doesn't announce itself, nor does it offer the illusion of justice and fairness. Instead, it whispers a warning in the howling wind. This is where Winterhold sends those they wish forgotten, and within its glacial prison walls lies the skeletal remains of prisoners long dead. Silent, frozen figures who raise more questions than answers. The Chill is unlike any other prison in Skyrim. It is the only hold facility not managed by jailers or city guards, but by conjured frost atronics. Elemental beings of ice who offer no sympathy, no nourishment, and no reprieve. And in the farthest corners of this glacial cave, you find them. Locked cages, bedrolls iced over with time, and the bones of those who never left. But who are they? Why are they left to die? And what does this unassuming location tell us about Winterhold, the college, and the darker undercurrents of Skyrim's justice system? The Chill is not labelled on any map and cannot be found through exploration alone. In fact, the only way most players discover it is through an arrest in the hold of Winterhold, one of the least populated and most isolated regions in Skyrim. When you choose imprisonment over a fine in this hold, instead of waking up in a city cell, you awaken in a cave. The walls are slick with frost, the air is heavy with silence, the cells are small, metallic cages with adept-level locks. 3 of them line the cave's walls. Each cage contains a bedroll, some bones, and all emit a chilling aura of neglect. But unlike other jails in Skyrim, there is no exit mechanism, no waiting guard to release you after time has passed. This is a place where you are meant to escape or die in. But what truly sets the Chill apart is what you find when you look closely at the details. 2 of the cages contain human remains. There are no journals, no named markers, no dialogue triggers to identify them. The game offers no quest or backstory. It gives you only the image of these bones, curled up on bedrolls, sealed behind iron bars. The implication is bleak. These were real prisoners, once alive, who died from exposure, starvation, or perhaps even at the hands of the frost trolls themselves. One cannot help but wonder, why are they so forgotten? Were they simply low-level criminals the Jarl wished to dispose of? Were they mages cast out of the College of Winterhold for breaking rules that went too far? Or were they political prisoners? People whose continued existence threatened the fragile order of a crumbling hold. There is one possibility that adds a particularly tragic angle. The college has a dark history. Members involved in necromancy, Daedric worship, and magical incidents have vanished with little explanation. These skeletal remains may be proof of those stories, evidence that the college doesn't exile its most dangerous members to the wilds, but locks them away in the Chill, where their mistakes can be quietly erased. While every other hold in Skyrim uses guards and jailers to maintain order, Winterhold relies on the frost trolls, summoned ice elementals. This is more than a mere aesthetic choice. It's emblematic of how Winterhold views its prisoners, not as citizens who've broken the law, but as expendables. People unworthy of even basic human dignity. These frost atronarchs don't feed, speak, or care. They won't hesitate to kill a prisoner attempting to escape. And their cold, mindless efficiency makes them the perfect tools for silent execution. If a prisoner were to die of starvation or illness, no guard would know. No reports would be filed, no one would ever visit the chill to retrieve their body. This system absolves any human of moral responsibility. It allows the authorities of Winterhold, whether the Jarl or the College, to maintain plausible deniability. The chill operates like a machine, and the Frost Atronachs are its gears. Players have speculated wildly over the years about who the skeletons in the chill may have been. Some theorists suggest that they could be remnants of the Great Collapse, the mysterious cataclysm that destroyed much of Winterhold and left the city in ruins. Perhaps in the chaos, the Jarl's court turned to the cruel punishments to maintain control. Others think the bones could belong to mages who dabbled in Daedric rituals or Black Soul gem magic, criminal acts even in the arcane lenient halls of the college. Reddit and the Elder Scrolls forums have pointed to possible connections with the Sigic Order or the remnants of the Mythic Dawn, hiding in plain sight and eliminated when discovered. Still, others believe the prisoners may not be criminals at all, but scapegoats. People who knew too much about the college's experiments, or who bore witness to things the Jarl's court wanted buried. There's also the uncanny silence about the chill in-game. No NPC mentions it, not even the guards or mages. You only hear about it when you're going to jail. It's almost as if everyone in Winterhold is pretending it doesn't exist. This kind of narrative omission is pretty rare in Skyrim, and often a signal that something darker lurks beneath the surface. The use of magic for containment and execution is a theme deeply ingrained in Skyrim's lore. But in the chill, that theme is taken to its coldest extreme. Unlike the Dwemer ruins, this isn't a mystical place meant to awe, it's meant to erase. Prisoners here aren't just locked away, they're deleted. No one comes looking for them and no one knows their names. It's a brutal metaphor for the unchecked power of Winterhold's institution. The Jarl, weakened and powerless, in a hold lost to time, may be clinging to order by any means. The college, unregulated and secretive, could be using the chill as a dumping ground for their mistakes. And that makes the skeletons more than just a set dressing. They are narrative relics, fossils of a system that no longer sees justice as rehabilitation, but as erasure. Skyrim is full of mysteries, but few are as quietly chilling as the chill. The prison offers no quests, no dialogue, no direct lore, but it tells a story all the same. Through its design, its silence, and the forgotten bones of the prisoners, it paints a picture of a hold struggling to maintain power, a college guarding its secrets, and a justice system that would rather you freeze in silence than be heard in defiance. The skeletons remain not just as relics of failed escapes or neglected prisoners, but as symbols of a broader truth in Skyrim. Sometimes the coldest places aren't just made of ice, they're made of indifference. And in the end, maybe that's the scariest mystery of all. Because even in Skyrim, it's very rare to see something as neglected as this. Caves in Skyrim are supposed to be simple. You go in, clear out enemies, grab some loot and move on. Most of the time you know exactly what you're getting into. But some caves don't follow that pattern. Some of them feel wrong the moment you step inside. Not because they're harder, but because of what's in them. The atmosphere, the details, the things you start to notice the deeper you go. And by the time you understand what you've walked into, it's already left an impression. These aren't just dangerous caves. They're the ones that stick with you. The ones that tell a story you weren't expecting. The ones that feel heavier than they should. And the ones that turn a simple exploration into something a lot more unsettling than you signed up for. Tolvold's Cave doesn't feel like a place you're meant to visit. It feels like a place people tried to escape from and never could. From the moment you step inside, there's a weight to it that goes beyond the usual cave atmosphere. It's not just dark or dangerous, it feels abandoned, in a very specific way. Like whatever happened here pushed everything to a breaking point and then left it frozen in that state. The layout itself reinforces this. It isn't a clean, linear dungeon. It twists, branches, loops back on itself, creating a sense of disorientation that builds the longer you stay. You're not just moving forward, you're navigating something that feels unstable, like the cave doesn't want to be understood. That confusion ties directly into the story behind it. Torvald's cave is most closely associated with the Lost Expedition, searching for a crown, led by explorers who believed they could uncover something valuable deep within its chambers. On paper, it's a familiar Skyrim setup. Adventurers chasing treasure, venturing into unknown territory, expecting danger, but ultimately confident in their ability to overcome it. But the deeper you go, the clearer it becomes that this wasn't just a failed expedition. It was a collapse. The journals scattered throughout the cave tell the story piece by piece, and what they reveal is far more unsettling than a simple defeat. The explorers didn't just run into enemies and lose. They began to turn on each other. Paranoia set in, trust broke down. The pressure of being trapped in such a confusing and closed environment began to distort their thinking. They started to suspect betrayal, to question motives, to see threats where there might not have been any. And once that shift happens, there's no coming back from it. The cave didn't just kill them, it changed them. That's what makes this cave feel so traumatic compared to other locations. It isn't just about external danger, it's about internal collapse. The environment itself becomes part of the threat. The twisting paths, the lack of clarity, the sense of being lost even when you're moving forward. It all contributes to the same pressure that the expedition experienced. You're not just reading about their descent, you're moving through it. The enemies reinforce this in a very distinct way. Falmer inhabit the cave, and their presence adds another layer to the unease. They're not just hostile, they're adapted to this kind of environment. They move through it with ease, navigating the same confusing layout that disorientates you. That contrast makes every encounter feel more uneven. You're reacting, trying to understand where you are and what's around you, while they operate with complete familiarity. And it doesn't stop there. Charles roam the deeper sections, adding a more visceral kind of threat. Their movement, their sounds, the way they emerge from the darkness, it all contributes to a sense that the cave isn't just inhabited, but alive in a way that works against you. The further in you go, the less control you feel like you have. Encounters don't feel contained, they feel like interruptions in something larger, something that exists independently of your own presence. That lack of control mirrors the story of the expedition perfectly. They came in with a goal, a clear objective, a sense of direction, and they lost all of it. The cave stripped that away piece by piece until all that was left was confusion and suspicion. Even the pacing of the cave contributes to this feeling. It's not a quick experience, it stretches on, with multiple sections that feel similar enough to blur together but different enough to keep you uncertain. There's no clear rhythm to it, no sense of progression that reassures you that you're getting closer to the end. Instead, it feels like you're moving through layers of the same space, each one slightly more disorienting than the last. That repetition creates a kind of fatigue, not just for the character, but for you as the player. And that fatigue is important, because it mirrors what the explorers must have felt. The longer they stayed, the harder it became to maintain clarity, to trust each other, to stay grounded in reality. The cave doesn't challenge you, it wears you down. By the time you reach the deeper sections where the crown of Barentia fragment lies, the significance of the treasure itself starts to feel secondary. It's still the objective, still the reason you're there, but it doesn't carry the same weight it might have at the start. Because everything you've experienced along the way reframes it. This wasn't worth it, not for them, and arguably not for you either. That realization is what makes the cave linger in your memory. It's not just another dungeon you cleared. It's a place where the story and the environment align in a way that reinforces each other. The confusion you feel isn't just gameplay, it's part of the narrative. The enemies aren't just obstacles, they're part of the ecosystem that contributed to the expedition's failure. Everything works together, and it all points in the same direction. This is what happens when control is lost, when direction fades, when isolation turns inward. That sense of collapse is made even more intense by just how hostile Tolvold's cave actually is, not just in design but in what inhabits it. This isn't a cave where danger comes in predictable waves. It feels layered, relentless, and constantly shifting. As you move through its different sections, the threats don't stay consistent, and that unpredictability adds to the pressure. You're not adapting to one type of enemy, you're constantly readjusting, never fully settling into a rhythm. Near the outer sections and higher elevations, the presence of ice wraiths immediately set the tone. They're not grounded enemies, they move erratically, almost bending, almost blending into the cold air itself, making them difficult to track and even harder to anticipate. Fighting them doesn't feel controlled, it feels reactive, like you're trying to hit something that doesn't fully exist in the same space as you. That alone creates tension early on, because it breaks the usual expectation of how encounters should feel. Then the cave shifts, frost trolls begin to appear, and with them comes a completely different kind of threat. Where ice wraiths are evasive and disorienting, frost trolls are direct and overwhelming. Their strength forces you into immediate high-pressure combat. They don't give you time to think, to plan, to recover. And in a cave that already feels confusing and enclosed, that kind of brute force becomes even more oppressive. You're not just fighting the enemy, you're fighting the space around you, trying to manage positioning in an environment that doesn't cooperate. Snow bears add another layer to this hostility. They're not as fast as trolls, but they are persistent, durable, and unpredictable in their own way. Their presence reinforces the idea that this cave isn't a controlled dungeon, it's an ecosystem. Different threats occupy different spaces, and moving through it feels like stepping into territories that weren't meant for you. And then there are the ghosts. This is where the cave's hostility shifts from physical to psychological. The spirits of the dead explorers don't just exist as enemies, they exist as reminders. They're not random, they're tied directly to the story, to the people who came here for the same reason you did and never made it out. Fighting them doesn't feel like clearing obstacles, it feels like confronting the aftermath of everything you've been reading about. They linger, they appear in spaces where the story starts to come together, reinforcing the idea that the cave didn't just kill these people, it trapped them. Their presence blurs the line between past and present. You're not just exploring what happened, you're standing in it, surrounded by it, forced to engage with it directly. And because of that, every encounter starts to feel heavier. You're not just progressing through enemies, you're moving through layers of failure, of desperation, of people who reached the same point you're at and couldn't go any further. That's what makes the hostility of Tolvold's cave so effective. It's not just constant, it's varied, unpredictable, and tied directly to the story. There's no moment where you feel fully in control, no point where the cave becomes manageable. Every new section introduces something different, something that forces you to adjust, to stay alert, to keep moving even when the environment itself feels like it's working against you. And when you combine that with everything else, the confusion, the isolation, the story of the expedition falling apart, it stops feeling like its standard dungeon entirely. Compared to other caves in Skyrim, which often focus on a single threat or a clear objective, Tolvold's cave feels layered. It's not just about fighting your way through, it's about understanding what happened, and more importantly, how it happened. The game doesn't spell it out for you, it gives you fragments, journals, environmental details, the placement of bodies, and leaves you to connect to them. And once you do, it changes how the entire cave feels, because you're no longer just exploring, you're retracing, following the same path, seeing the same signs, recognizing the same turning points that led to the expedition's collapse. And that creates a kind of tension that doesn't rely on surprise or difficulty. It relies on recognition, on the slow realization that you're walking through a pattern that's already been played out, that someone else made these choices, took these paths, pushed forward despite the warning signs, and it didn't end well. That's what makes Tolvold's cave one of the most traumatic caves in Skyrim. Not because it's the hardest, not because it's the most dangerous in a traditional sense, but because it's one of the few places where the danger isn't just something you fight. It's something you build over time, a loss of clarity, a loss of control, a slow shift from purpose to confusion. And by the time you leave, you don't feel like you've completed something. You feel like you've come out of something that wasn't just about survival, but about holding on to your sense of direction long enough to make it back out. And knowing that not everyone who went in managed to do the same. Movarth's lair doesn't feel like a place you discover. It feels like a place you're led to after already knowing something is wrong. By the time you even approach the cave, the tone has already been set by Morthal itself. A town weighed down by suspicion, quiet fear, and a tragedy that no one fully understands at first. The burned house, the missing answers, the uneasy conversations, it all points towards something hidden, something operating just out of sight. And when Movarth's lair finally comes into focus, it doesn't feel like a reveal, it feels like a confirmation. The entrance alone sets the tone. It's not dramatic or imposing, but it feels concealed in a deliberate way, tucked into the marshland as if it's meant to be overlooked. There's no sense of grandeur, no indication that something powerful resides within. Just a quiet opening that leads into something far more controlled than it appears from the outside. And that control is what defines the entire experience. Because this isn't just a cave, it's a system. From the moment you step inside, the layout makes that clear. The tunnels aren't chaotic or purely natural, they feel structured, almost intentional. Paths lead into one another with a sense of purpose. And the more you go, it feels like you're moving through a space that has been shaped, not just occupied. This isn't a temporary hideout. It's a place that has been maintained, expanded, and used over time. And that's where the unease starts to build, because places like this don't exist without direction, without someone at the centre of it all. Movarth himself is that centre, and his presence defines everything about the cave, even before you reach him. He isn't just another vampire hiding in the dark. He's been here for a long time, operating quietly, building something beneath the surface of Morthal without drawing attention. His influence extends beyond the cave itself, reaching into the town through manipulation, control, and careful positioning. That's what makes this cave different from others. It's not isolated, it's connected. The vampires inside aren't just enemies, they're part of something organised. They move with purpose, positioned in ways that suggest awareness of their surroundings and their role within the space. This isn't a random occupation, it's coordination, and that coordination turns every encounter into something more than just a fight. It feels like you're disrupting something structured, something that has been functioning without interference for a long time. The presence of thralls reinforces this even further. These aren't just bodies or remnants. They are people who've been pulled into this system, stripped of autonomy, and repurposed. Some of them come from Morthal itself, which ties the cave directly back to the town in a way that feels invasive. This isn't a threat that exists outside the community. It's one that has reached into it, taken from it, and brought those people down here. And that connection is what makes the cave feel so personal. You're not just clearing out enemies, you're uncovering what's been happening to the people of Morthal. That realization shifts the tone completely. Every thrall you encounter isn't just an obstacle, they're evidence. Proof that the threat wasn't contained, that it extended outward, that it affected lives beyond the cave's walls. And because of that, the deeper you go, the more it feels like you're moving through the hidden half of the town itself. A version of it that exists underground, controlled, silent, and completely out of sight. The atmosphere supports this in subtle but effective ways. Unlike caves that rely on chaos or overwhelming danger, Movarth's lair feels restrained. The lighting is low, the sound design minimal, the movement within the cave deliberate. There's no sense of randomness. Everything feels placed, intentional, part of a larger design. That restraint creates tension, because it suggests that nothing here is accidental. Every tunnel, every encounter, every presence, it all serves as a purpose. And that purpose leads back to Movarth. When you finally reach him, the confrontation doesn't feel like climax of a dungeon. It feels like the exposure of something that has been hidden for far too long. He isn't just powerful, he's composed, controlled, exactly what you'd expect from someone who has been operating in secrecy for so long. There's no desperation in him, no sense that he's been cornered. Even in defeat, he feels like someone who was fully in control of his environment until the very end. And that's what makes him unsettling, not just what he is, but how long he's been able to exist without being stopped. That longevity raises questions that the cave itself doesn't answer directly. How many people were actually taken? How long has this been happening? How did it remain hidden for so long in a place as small as Morthal? The game doesn't give you clear numbers or timelines. It leaves you with implications. But if you start piecing those implications together, a clearer and far more unsettling picture begins to form. Markarth isn't just a random vampire. He's a figure with a documented past, known long before the events in Skyrim as a vampire hunter who ultimately became the very thing he once pursued. That alone suggests time. This isn't a recent transformation or a sudden appearance. He's had years, possibly decades, to refine how he operates. And by the time you encounter him in Morthal, he isn't experimenting anymore. He's established. The structure of the cave supports that idea. This isn't a temporary refuge or a recently claimed hideout. The layout, the number of occupants, the presence of both vampires and thralls, it all points towards something that has been building up gradually. Systems like this don't appear overnight. They require time to develop, to stabilize, to function without drawing attention. Every thrall you see represents a moment where someone disappeared, where someone was taken and never returned as themselves. And that's where the numbers start to become uncomfortable. Morthal is a small town. People notice when others go missing, but only to a point. In a place already defined by isolation and unease, disappearances can be explained away. Illness, travel, the dangers of the swamp. It wouldn't take many incidents over a long enough period for a pattern to form without ever being fully recognised as one. One person gone 1 month, another weeks later, spread out enough it doesn't look like a crisis. It looks like misfortune. And that's likely how Markarth kept it hidden. Not by avoiding attention completely, but by staying beneath the threshold where attention turns into action. The thralls themselves reinforce this. They aren't just generic figures. They're evidence of a process. People taken, turned, and repurposed over time. And because they've kept within the cave, removed from the surface, their existence doesn't feed back into the town in a visible way. There are no signs of struggle in the streets, no open conflict, no immediate reason for the guards to investigate further. Everything happens quietly, and that quiet is what allows it to continue. There's also the geography of Morthal itself. The surrounding marsh is dense, fog-covered, difficult to navigate. Visibility is low, movement is slow, and the environment naturally obscures what lies within it. A cave hidden in that landscape doesn't need elaborate defences. It just needs to exist in the right place. People don't wander aimlessly through the swamp. They stick to what they know, what's safe, what's visible. And Markarth operates just beyond that boundary, close enough to reach the town, far enough to remain unseen. That balance is what makes his operation sustainable. He doesn't overextend, he doesn't draw unnecessary attention. He takes what he needs, when he needs it, and maintains control over everything within his reach. And because of that restraint, the system continues, quietly, efficiently, for longer than anyone realizes it. By the time you uncover it, it doesn't feel like you've stopped something new. It feels like you've interrupted something that's been working exactly as intended. And with the resolution of the quest, it doesn't even fully remove that feeling. Markarth is defeated, the immediate threat is gone, but the knowledge of what was happening remains. The town doesn't suddenly feel safe. It just feels aware, like something has been uncovered, but not fully erased. And that lingering awareness is what makes the cave stick, because it doesn't end cleanly. It doesn't reset the environment or restore a sense of normalcy. It just removes one part of something larger and leaves you to consider what else might still be hidden. That's what defines Markarth's lair as one of the most traumatic caves in Skyrim. Not because of how difficult it is, not because of how many enemies it contains, but because of what it represents. A system built in secret, a threat that operates quietly, a place that doesn't just exist on its own, but connects to something beyond it. And once you've seen that connection, once you understand how close it was to everything else, it becomes harder to look at places like Morthal the same way again. Because if something like that could exist just beneath it, undetected, uninterrupted for so long, then the question isn't just what was hidden there, It's what else might be hidden somewhere else, waiting just out of sight. Liar's Retreat doesn't feel like a dungeon you're meant to clear. It feels like a place you arrive at too late. From the outside, it presents itself as something relatively ordinary. A cave used by bandits, a hideout carved in the rocky terrain, the kind of place you've seen dozens of times before. There's no immediate signal that anything is different. No warning that what you're about to walk into isn't just another encounter, but the aftermath of something far more violent and far more final. And that's what makes it so effective. Because the shift doesn't happen at the entrance. It happens gradually as you move deeper inside and start to realise that this isn't an active stronghold. It's what's left of one. The first signs are subtle. Bodies in positions that don't quite line up with normal combat. Equipment left scattered, not looted or rearranged, but dropped. The absence of movement in spaces that should be occupied. At first it feels like you've just arrived after a fight. But the deeper you go, the clearer it becomes that this wasn't a fight in the usual sense. It was a massacre. The bandits who once occupied Liar's Retreat didn't just lose control of the cave. They were overwhelmed. And the cause of that is what turns the entire location into something far more unsettling, the Falmer. Their presence isn't immediately obvious in the early sections, which makes the discovery of what happened feel more like a realization than a reveal. You piece it together through the environment, through the absence of survivors, through the way everything feels abruptly abandoned, and then you see them. The Falmer don't occupy the cave like bandits do. They don't establish a clear territory, don't leave visible signs of organisation that you can easily track. Instead, they move through it in a way that feels invasive, like they've taken over something without fully reshaping it. That contrast between what the cave was and what it has become is where the unease really sets in. Because the structure is still there, but the people aren't. And the way they're gone tells the story. Liar's Retreat isn't a place where the bandits made a last stand. There's no central point of defence, no clear attempt to hold ground. The bodies are scattered throughout the cave, suggesting panic, retreat, and ultimately failure to escape. Some are positioned as if they were caught off guard, others as if they tried to flee deep into the cave, only to run into something worse. That distribution matters, because it shows that this wasn't a controlled confrontation. It was chaos. The Falmer didn't just attack, they surged. And once they did, there was no recovery. That sense of sudden collapse is what makes the cave feel traumatic rather than just dangerous. You're not fighting through a threat that's currently active. You're moving through the remains of something that was already decided. The bandits never had a chance to regroup, never had a moment to stabilise the situation. Whatever happened here happened quickly, and it happened completely. The Falmer themselves reinforce this in how they behave. They don't feel like intruders. They feel like the new baseline. They move through the cave with familiarity, navigating spaces that were never designed by them, adapting without needing to change to the environment. That adaptability makes them feel less like occupants and more like something that spreads, something that fills whatever space becomes available. And that's what makes their presence so unsettling, because it suggests that this wasn't a unique event. It's something that they just do. Liar's Retreat just happens to be one of the places where you get to see the result. The deeper sections of the cave push this even further. As you move through into the areas where the Falmer presence is more concentrated, the environment starts to shift, not structurally, but tonally. The cave feels less like a bandit hideout and more like something reclaimed. The lighting, the sounds, the pacing of encounters, it all becomes more oppressive, more controlled by the Falmer rather than shaped by what came before. And that transition is seamless. There's no clear point where one ends and the other begins. It just happens, which mirrors what likely happened to the bandits themselves. They didn't have a moment where they realised they had lost. They were already losing by the time they understood what was happening. That lack of awareness is what makes the massacre feel so one-sided. This wasn't a battle between equals. It was an encounter between a group that thought it controlled the space and something that didn't need to respect that control at all. The Falmer don't operate by the same rules. They don't need light, don't rely on visibility, don't approach combat in a way that allows for preparation or strategy in the traditional sense. They move through darkness as if it's an advantage rather than a limitation. And in a cave like Liar's Retreat, that advantage becomes overwhelming. For the bandits, the cave was a base. For the Falmer, it was just another environment. And that difference is what determined the outcome. Even the pacing of the cave reflects this imbalance. You don't encounter the Falmer in a way that builds up to climax. You encounter them as a continuation of something that's already happened. There's no escalation, no moment where the threat suddenly becomes clear. It's just there, present, consistent, reinforcing the idea that the cave is no longer what it used to be. That consistency creates a kind of inevitability, because once the Falmer are present, the outcome feels fixed. There's no version of events where the bandits reclaim the cave, no alternative where things stabilise, just a before and an after, and you're standing right in that after. What makes Liar's Retreat even more unsettling is how differently it presents the Falmer compared to other caves they inhabit. In most Falmer locations, places like Blackreach or the deeper Dwemer ruins, the Falmer feel established. They've built around the environment, adapted it, shaped it into something that reflects their presence. You see their structures, their Charles pens, their pathways carved into spaces that already feel ancient and removed from the surface world. Those locations feel like Falmer territory from the start. You enter knowing what you're dealing with, and the environment prepares you for it. Liar's Retreat doesn't do that. It's not a Falmer cave, at least it wasn't. And that distinction matters, because instead of walking into a place defined by the Falmer, you're walking into a place that was taken by them. And that structure still reflects its original purpose as a bandit hideout. The layout hasn't been fully transformed. The environment hasn't been reshaped to suit Falmer life. It's caught in between, partially reclaimed, but not fully converted. And that in-between state is what makes it so much more disturbing. In a place like Blackreach, the Falmer feel like a natural extension of the environment. They belong there in a way that, while unsettling, is consistent. But in Liar's Retreat, they feel invasive, out of place, but not in a way that weakens them. In a way that shows how easily they can take something that wasn't theirs and make it function for them anyway. That adaptability is the real threat, because it means there's no safe boundary, no clear line where Falmer territory begins and ends. They don't need a specific kind of environment to exist. They can spread into whatever space becomes vulnerable. And Liar's Retreat is the perfect example of that vulnerability. A surface-level hideout, a place that should have been relatively secure, overtaken completely by something that didn't need to follow the same rules. That contrast makes the Falmer feel more aggressive here than in their usual environments. Not because they behave differently, but because the context changes how you interpret them. In their own caves, they're inhabitants. Here, they are conquerors. And the cave itself reflects that shift. It hasn't fully become theirs, but it's no longer what it was. It's something in between. And that's what makes it feel so unstable. You don't read about what happened, you see it. And that makes it harder to distance yourself from. Because there's no interpretation needed. The evidence is direct, clear, final. The cave doesn't ask you to solve a mystery. It shows you the exact result of one. And that result is absolute. Everyone who was here is gone. And what replaced them isn't just stronger, it's more suited to the space, more adapted, more permanent. That's what makes Liar's Retreat one of the most traumatic caves in Skyrim. Not because of its difficulty, not because of its scale, but because of how completely it captures the moment where control is lost and never regained. It's not a story about struggle, it's a story about being overtaken, about a place that belonged to one group and now belongs to something else entirely. And the transition between those two states is so complete, so irreversible, that it doesn't feel like a change. It feels like erasure. A reminder that in Skyrim, some places don't just fall, they get replaced. And once that happens, there's nothing left to reclaim. Stillborn Cave doesn't try to hide what it is. The name alone already tells you that something went wrong here long before you ever step inside. But even with that warning, nothing really prepares you for how heavy the place feels once you're actually in it. It's not a large cave, not particularly complex, and on paper, it should be a quick stop. Clear the enemies, move on, forget it. But the moment you begin to notice what's scattered throughout its interior, it stops feeling like a standard location and starts feeling like something far more deliberate. Because Stillborn Cave isn't just another Falman nest or animal den. It's a place defined by what's left behind. The first thing that stands out is how quiet it feels. Not silent in a literal sense. There are still enemies, still movement, but quiet in tone. There's no sense of activity beyond what's immediately in front of you. No suggestion that this place is functioning in any ongoing way. It feels static, like everything that needed to happen here already has. And that stillness makes the details stand out more. Because the cave is filled with skeletons, remains of people who died here before. Not in the usual Skyrim way, where bones are scattered as part of the environment or tied to ancient ruins. These feel different. Their placement, their proximity to each other, the way they're grouped, it all suggests that they didn't just end up here randomly. There's a pattern to them, even if it isn't immediately obvious. Some are positioned as if they were together, others as if they were trying to move, to escape, to reach something. And that's where the unease starts to build, because these aren't just remains, they're traces of a moment that didn't end well. The more you move through the cave, the clearer that becomes. There's no sign of a structured settlement, no indication that this was a place people lived in for long. Instead, it feels like somewhere people ended up, a point they reached rather than a place they built. And that distinction matters, because it changes how you interpret what happened here. This wasn't a community that slowly declined. It was a group that arrived and then didn't leave. The presence of the Falmer deeper in the cave adds context, but not in a way that simplifies things. They're part of the environment, part of the danger, but they don't fully explain the arrangement of the skeletons. If anything, they complicate it. Because while the Falmer are clearly hostile, the state of the cave suggests something more drawn out than a single violent encounter. It doesn't feel like a battle. It feels like something slower, something that happened over time. The name Stillborn starts to carry more weight the longer you stay. It's not just a grim title, it feels descriptive, like whatever was meant to happen here never had the chance to fully exist. A group that never established itself, a journey that ended before it could become anything else. There's a sense of interruption to the entire space, like you're looking at something that was cut off before it had the chance to develop. And that creates a very specific kind of discomfort, because there's no resolution, no clear narrative that ties everything together, just an outcome. The skeletons themselves become the focus of that outcome. They're not hidden, not tucked away. They're part of the cave's identity. You can't move through the space without noticing them, without being reminded of them. And because of that, they start to feel less like background detail and more like the central element of the location. They are what define it. And the lack of explanation surrounding them is what makes them unsettling, because you're left to fill in the gaps yourself. Were these travelers, refugees, a group trying to escape something else? The game doesn't tell you. There are no journals, no direct clues, no single piece of evidence that gives you a clear answer. And that absence is intentional. It forces you to engage with the space differently, to look at what's there and try to understand it without being guided. That process of trying to reconstruct what happened without being given a clear narrative is what makes Stillborn Cave stick with you. The enemies are there, but they're not the focus. They don't define the experience. The remains do. Because they don't change, they don't react, they just exist. And that existence creates a kind of permanence that's hard to ignore. Compared to other caves in Skyrim, which often revolve around a central story or a specific event, Stillborn Cave feels more fragmented. It doesn't present a complete picture. It gives you pieces and leaves the rest up to you. And because of that, the story you build in your head can end up being more unsettling than anything the game could have explicitly shown. That ambiguity is what gives the cave its impact, because it never fully resolves. You leave with the same questions you had when you entered, just with more context, more detail, more reason to think about them. Even the scale of the cave contributes to this. It's not expansive, not layered in the way larger dungeons are. Everything is relatively close together, which means the details aren't spread out. They're concentrated. You don't have long stretches of empty space between discoveries. Everything is immediate, present, unavoidable. And that makes it harder to distance yourself from. You can't just move past it, you have to move through it. The Falmer presence, while secondary to the overall tone, still plays an important role. They represent the current state of the cave, the continuation of something after whatever originally happened has already concluded. They don't explain the past, but they define the present. And that contrast between what was and what is adds another layer to that unease, because it suggests that the cave didn't just end. It was taken over, reused, repurposed. And whatever happened to the people who were here became part of the environment, something absorbed into the space rather than removed. When you compare Stillborn Cave to other traumatic caves in Skyrim, what stands out isn't just what happened, but how little of it is explained. In places like Torvald's Cave, the trauma comes from unraveling a clear sequence of events. An expedition enters, paranoia builds, everything collapses within. You follow that descent step by step, almost reliving it as you move deeper. In Markarth's lair, the horror is structured, controlled. There's a system behind it, a clear cause and effect tied to a single figure pulling the strings. Liar's Retreat shows you the aftermath of a violent takeover, a moment where control is lost instantly and completely. Stillborn Cave doesn't give you any of that clarity. There's no defined timeline, no central figure, no single event you can point to and say, this is what happened. And that lack of structure makes it feel more unsettling in a different way. Where other caves guide your understanding, Stillborn Cave removes the guidance entirely. You're not retracing steps, you're guessing them. You're trying to build a narrative out of fragments that don't quite connect. And that uncertainty becomes part of the experience. It also differs in scale and intensity. Torvald's Cave overwhelms you with complexity and pressure, constantly shifting and disorientating you. Liar's Retreat hits you with the immediacy of violence, a clear before and after that's impossible to ignore. Markarth's lair unsettles you through connection, tying the cave directly to a town and making the threat feel invasive. Stillborn Cave feels contained, but not in a comforting way, in a way that feels sealed off, like whatever happened here stayed here. It doesn't reach outward, doesn't connect to a larger system, doesn't build into something bigger. It just exists, isolated, holding on to its outcome without explanation. And that isolation is what makes it stand out, because it removes context, it removes resolution. It leaves you with something that doesn't expand the world, it just sits within it, unresolved. Compared to other caves which often feel like parts of larger stories, Stillborn Cave feels like a fragment that was never complete. And that incompleteness becomes its defining feature. It doesn't tell you what to think. It leaves you with just enough to realize that whatever happened here didn't follow a clean narrative. And that makes it harder to process, because there's nothing to anchor your understanding to. No beginning, no clear middle, just an end. And the remains of how it might have happened. That's what sets it apart. Not the scale, not the danger, but the absence of explanation. And that absence lingers far longer than any defined story ever could. Everything is constant, unchanging. And because of that, it anchors the entire experience. That's what makes Stillborn Cave one of the most traumatic caves in Skyrim. Not because it overwhelms you with danger, not because it presents a clear, dramatic story, but because it leaves you with something incomplete. A place where something ended without explanation, where people arrived and never left, where the only thing that remains is the evidence of that outcome. And no matter how long you spend there, no matter how closely you look, that outcome never becomes clearer. It just becomes heavier. Because sometimes the most unsettling places in Skyrim aren't the ones that tell you exactly what happened, but the ones that leave you with just enough to understand that whatever it was, it didn't end well. Darkfall Cave doesn't feel like a place you explore. It feels like a place you descend into, both physically and mentally. From the moment you step inside, there's a shift in tone that sets it apart from almost every other cave in Skyrim. It's not just darker, not just more isolated. It feels removed, like you've stepped out of the normal world and into something quieter, older, and far less defined. And that only deepens the further you go, because Darkfall Cave isn't just a cave, it's a transition. At first, it presents itself simply enough, a cold enclosed space with limited visibility. The kind of environment you've seen before, but almost immediately there's a sense that this place isn't meant to be navigated in the same way as others. The paths don't guide you clearly, the lighting is minimal, forcing you to rely on instinct rather than direction. And the deeper you move, the more the cave seems to open and close around you in ways that feel unpredictable. You're not just progressing, you're slipping further in. That lack of clarity is what defines the early part of Darkfall Cave. Unlike caves that establish a rhythm, enemy, corridor, room, repeat, this one disrupts that pattern entirely. Movement feels slower, more deliberate. You're constantly adjusting, trying to understand the layout, trying to stay orientated in a space that doesn't offer many clear points of reference. And then, just like usual, the Falmer appear. Their presence changes everything again, but not in the way you might expect. In other caves, Falmer encounters feel aggressive, immediate, designed to overwhelm. Here they feel quieter, more integrated into the environment. They don't just exist in the cave, they belong to it. They move through it with familiarity, navigating darkness and terrain with ease while you struggle to keep up. That contrast creates a different kind of tension. You're not just fighting enemies, you're out of place. The Falmer aren't the only threat though. Charles lurk deeper within, adding another layer of unpredictability that keeps you from ever feeling settled. Their sudden appearances, their movement through the environment, it all reinforces the idea that this cave isn't structured for you. It's structured around something else, something that existed here long before you arrived. And as you move further in, the cave begins to change, subtly at first. The tight and closed space begins to open up. The darkness shifts, giving way to faint light. The environment transitions from oppressive to something almost surreal. You start to hear water, see reflections, notice details that weren't present before. And then eventually, you reach the Forgotten Vale. That moment is where Darkfall Cave reveals what it really is. Not just a location, but a passage, a boundary between one space and another. And that transition is what makes it so unsettling, because everything leading up to it feels like a descent into something unknown, something disconnected from the rest of Skyrim. And when you finally emerge into the Vale, the contrast doesn't feel like relief, it feels disorienting. The open space, the light, the scale of the area, it all comes so suddenly that it's hard to process. You don't feel like you've arrived somewhere new. You feel like you've crossed into something differently entirely. That shift recontextualizes the entire cave. It wasn't just a dungeon you cleared. It was a path you followed, one that led you somewhere you couldn't have reached any other way. And because of that, everything inside the cave takes on a different meaning. The darkness isn't just atmosphere, it's separation. The confusion isn't just design, it's transition. The enemies aren't just obstacles, they're part of the boundary. And that boundary is what makes Darkfall Cave one of the most traumatic caves in Skyrim. Not because of what happens inside it, but because of where it takes you. That sense of transition becomes even clearer when you compare Darkfall Cave to places like Gloomreach and Chillwind Depths. Because both of these caves approach Falmer territory in a completely different way. Gloomreach, for example, is expansive, open in a subterranean sense, and filled with bioluminescent mushrooms that create an eerie but strangely readable environment. You can see where you're going, you can understand the scale of the space. Even though it's dangerous, it feels established, like a place that exists on its own terms, with a clear identity and a visible ecosystem. The Falmer there feel rooted. They've adapted the environment, built around it and made it their own in a way that feels almost stable, even if it's hostile. Chillwind Depths operates similarly, though in a more enclosed and oppressive way. It's darker, tighter, and more suffocating, but it follows a recognizable structure. You descend deeper, encounter stronger resistance, and gradually uncover more of what lies beneath. The presence of Falmer and Charles builds in intensity, but it's consistent. You understand the progression, even if it's uncomfortable. It feels like a place you're meant to conquer, step by step, layer by layer. Darkfall Cave doesn't follow either of those patterns. It doesn't feel established like Gloomreach. It doesn't feel structured like Chillwind Depths. Instead, it feels in between. Where Gloomreach invites you to observe its environment, and Chillwind Depths forces you to push through it, Darkfall Cave keeps you uncertain the entire time. Visibility is limited, but not in a way that creates straightforward tension. It creates disorientation. The paths don't clearly signal progression, and the environment don't stabilise long enough for you to feel like you've adapted to it. And the Falmer reflect that difference. In Gloomreach, they feel like inhabitants. In Chillwind Depths, they feel like defenders. And in Darkfall Cave, they feel like part of the transition itself. They don't just occupy the space, they reinforce its instability. They appear in ways that feel less predictable, less tied to territory, and more tied to movement. You don't get the sense that you're clearing areas or gaining control. You're just passing through spaces where they already existed. That lack of control is what separates Darkfall Cave from the others. In both Gloomreach and Chillwind Depths, there's a sense that you're progressing towards something, an endpoint, a goal, a resolution. The caves feel like complete experiences, contained within themselves. Darkfall Cave, on the other hand, never feels complete on its own. It feels like part of something larger, something that extends beyond its boundaries. And that's what makes it so different, because it's not trying to be a destination, it's trying to move you somewhere else, which makes everything inside it feel less like a challenge to overcome, and more like a space you have to endure long enough to pass through. It doesn't tell you a story, it literally puts you inside one. And that story isn't about survival or conflict, it's about movement. About leaving one place and arriving in another, without fully understanding what lies between them. That's what lingers, not the enemies, not the layout, but the feeling of crossing something, of moving through a space that exists not for its own sake, but as a connection between two worlds. And once you've experienced that, it changes how you see caves in Skyrim, because it shows that they don't all serve the same purpose. Some are destinations, some are challenges, and some, like Darkfall Cave, are something else entirely. A passage, a threshold, a place that doesn't just exist on its own, but exists to take you somewhere you weren't meant to reach easily. And that's what ultimately makes it traumatic. Not because it overwhelms you, but because it removes your sense of control, your sense of place, and replaces it with something uncertain, something transitional, something that doesn't fully belong to the world you thought you understood. And by the time you come out the other side, you don't just feel like you've completed a cave. You feel like you've passed through something that changed the space around you and your place within it. Skyrim is a land built on myth, power, and conflict. Its mountains are tall, its holds proud, and its ruins ancient. But beneath its snow-covered peaks and stone cities lies a darker world, a world of secret rituals, forgotten gods, and the remnants of people who have never truly let go of their old forbidden faiths. Among these shadowed places, none are quite as unsettling as Wolfskull Cave. Hidden in the cliffs west of Solitude, Wolfskull Cave is more than just another dungeon. It's a wound in the world, a reminder that even the proud and orderly imperial capital is built on something twisted and restless. Inside, necromancers gather, chanting in the dark, their voices echoing through the hollowed bones of the earth. Their goal? To bring back Protima Septim, the Wolf Queen of Solitude. A woman so vile, so consumed by ambition and death, that even in death she refused to stay gone. To understand why Wolfskull Cave is so disturbing, one must first understand the figure whose legacy it preserves. Protima Septim, the Wolf Queen. Protima was not merely an evil ruler. She was a force of nature, a storm in human form. The daughter of Pelagius II and the aunt of the Emperor Uriel Septim III, she manipulated the very empire from within, sowing chaos in pursuit of power. Her reign of influence was one of deceit, war, and black sorcery. Even in death, her name lingered like a curse, whispered through the catacombs of Solitude. The legends say she could speak to the dead. Others claim she fed on their souls. When she finally died, her body was entombed deep beneath Solitude. But her spirit, her will, refused to fade. Centuries later, necromancers sought to bring her back, choosing Wolfskull Cave as the place of her resurrection. The choice was deliberate. This cave, carved into the bones of an ancient hill, feels alive. The walls breathe, the air hums with magic, and every echo sounds like a whisper. It's a place where death never truly rests. What makes Wolfskull Cave so unsettling isn't what happens inside, it's where it is. The cave sits just west of Solitude, the capital of Skyrim, a city ruled by imperial authority, guarded by soldiers and seen as a beacon of order and civilization. Yet mere minutes from its gates lies a pit of blasphemy, a necromantic cult openly conducting rituals to resurrect a centuries-old queen of evil. The proximity is disturbing. It suggests that darkness in Skyrim is not distant. It thrives right under the noses of the powerful. While nobles feast in the Blue Palace and merchants trade in Solitude Square, the dead are being awakened in the hills nearby. It's this contrast between civilization and corruption that makes Wolfskull Cave so haunting. It's not just a place of danger, it's a reminder that Skyrim's peace is fragile, its light barely holding back the shadows. When the Dragonborn enters Wolfskull Cave during the quest The Man Who Cried Wolf, they find something few players forget. Deep inside, a massive cavern opens, a chasm lit by blue magical fire. Necromancers stand on platforms carved from stone, chanting in unison, their voices weaving through the air like smoke. Lightning crackles, bones rattle, and in the center, above a pit of spectral energy, a ghostly figure begins to form. "Return, O Wolf Queen, return to us," they cry. This is the summoning of Potema, a ritual of resurrection so powerful it shakes the very cave itself. The player witnesses the spectral outline of her spirit, clawing her way back toward the mortal realm, her laugh echoing across the stone walls. Even when the Dragonborn disrupts the ritual, it's too late. The ritual succeeds partially. Potema returns as a restless spirit, her essence scattered across the crypts of Solitude. Unlike many of Skyrim's caves, Wolfskull Cave feels deliberate. It's not a mine nor a natural tunnel system. It does feel built, as though someone long ago carved it out with intention. The stone is unnaturally smooth in places, and certain chambers bear the marks of old rituals. Torches flicker blue, chains hang from the ceiling, ancient runes faintly glow when light passes over them. It's unclear whether the necromancers chose this cave for its seclusion or because it was already tainted. Some believe it was once a temple to Daedric forces, possibly Molag Bal or Namira. Others think Potema herself may have used it during her lifetime as a site of dark experiments. Whatever the truth, its architecture tells a story. This place was meant for worship, for sacrifice, and for secrecy. The deeper you go, the more it feels like the mountain itself wants to swallow you whole. Wolfskull Cave is filled with sound, whispers, wind, the hum of necromantic energy. But there's something else, something quieter, yet more disturbing. Presence. When walking through its corridors, players often describe feeling watched. The shadows seem thicker than they should ever be. The chanting doesn't always stop when you defeat the necromancers. Sometimes, even after the ritual ends, faint echoes of her laughter can still be heard. This isn't imagination, it's environmental storytelling. The designers of Skyrim created Wolfskull Cave to feel haunted. Even without ghosts or monsters, the atmosphere alone creates unease. The lighting is pale and sickly, the geometry is claustrophobic, funneling you ever downward. The air is filled with faint dust motes like ash. It's as if the cave itself resents your presence, as though you are trespassing in a sacred tomb that wants to remain undisturbed. Although the player stops the initial summoning in The Man Who Cried Wolf, Potema's resurrection cannot be undone. Later, during the quest The Wolf Queen Awakened, you must enter her catacombs beneath Solitude to finish what the necromancers began, to destroy what they revived. This narrative thread, however, always leads back to Wolfskull Cave. It's where it started. It's where the boundary between life and death was first perceived, What's chilling is that even though you cleanse Solitude of Potter's influence, Wolfskull Cave remains. The necromancers may be dead, but the energy lingers. The torches still burn. The cave never resets to normal wildlife like other dungeons. It remains forever marked as though the ritual carved a scar into the land itself. Wolfskull Cave is no longer just a location. It's a symptom of something deeper, Skyrim's inability to let go of its past. Why Wolfskull? The name itself carries weight. Wolves in Nordic mythology are creatures of death and inevitability. They represent the wild, the uncontainable, the devourer of the sun at the end of the world. To add skull to that image creates something doubly grim, a symbol of both savagery and mortality. The Wolf Queen herself embraced that symbol. Her followers often referred to her as the wolf among the sheep, the devourer of kings. In resurrecting her, the necromancers sought to awaken not just her power, but her spirit and her hunger. Thus, Wolfskull Cave becomes a shrine not just to Pottermore, but to the concept of corruption itself. It's where the civilized world's mask slips, revealing the beast beneath. What truly makes Wolfskull Cave disturbing is not just its lore, but its psychological weight. It's not filled with jump scares or overwhelming enemies. It's filled with implication. Everything about it suggests desecration. The bones piled high, the blood-stained altars, the ritual chambers echoing with phantom chants. Even when empty, the place feels alive, as though the walls remember the horrors committed within them. Skyrim has many dangerous dungeons, but few feel as morally wrong as Wolfskull Cave. Here, death isn't just an accident of war or survival, a deliberate perversion of the natural order. That makes it one of the most disturbing locations in all of Skyrim, not because of monsters, but because of human evil. Wolfskull Cave stands as one of Skyrim's most disturbing locations because it's not about what's alive, it's about what refuses to stay dead. Pottermore's laughter may have faded, her bones may have crumbled, but her spirit lingers in the darkness. The cave remains silent and waiting, like a wound that never quite closes. Skyrim is full of monsters, bandits and beasts, but only in Wolfskull Cave does evil feel so human. And that is what makes it truly terrifying. Wolfskull Cave is not just a place of death. It's a reminder that in Skyrim, some nightmares don't end, they endure. When you look at all of these caves together, what really stands out isn't just how dangerous they are, it's how differently they leave an impact on you. Because traumatic in Skyrim doesn't come from difficulty alone, it comes from what you walk away thinking about after you've left. Some caves overwhelm you with pressure. They confuse you, wear you down, make you feel like you're losing control the deeper you go. Others hit you with the aftermath of something that already happened, places where the story is finished, and all that's left is the evidence of how badly it ended. And then there are caves that don't give you answers at all. They leave gaps, fragments, just enough for you to understand that something went wrong, but not enough to ever fully piece it together. That's what makes them stick. Because you're not just fighting through enemies, you're experiencing something that lingers beyond the moment. One cave might trap you in a slow collapse, where everything falls apart from the inside. Another might show you what it looks like when something is overtaken completely, replaced without a trace of what came before. Some feel personal, small, contained, while others feel like transitions, like you're passing through something that isn't meant to be understood in a single visit. And the key thing they all share, they don't resolve cleanly. You finish them, you leave, but they don't feel finished. There's always something left behind, an image, a detail, a question that doesn't quite settle. And that's what separates these caves from the rest of Skyrim. Most locations are designed to be completed, understood, moved on from. These aren't. They stay with you because they don't give you closure, because they rely on you to connect the dots, to interpret what you saw, to sit with the implications, instead of being told exactly what to think. And once you've experienced enough of them, it changes how you explore the rest of Skyrim. You stop rushing, you start paying attention. you notice details you might have ignored before. Because you realize that some of the darkest parts of Skyrim aren't hidden behind bosses or locked doors. They're hidden in plain sight, in spaces between fights, in the things the game doesn't explain, and in the quiet realization that sometimes the most traumatic places aren't the ones that challenge you the most, but the ones that leave you with something you can't quite shake, even after you're gone.